Welcome to Fanfiction Audiobooks. Pirates of the Navy Thunder God. Chapter 41, Old Lover and Mistress? What do you think about traveling to the world of One Piece? If you interview thousands of time travelers, most of them will answer like this. Become stronger, and stand on top of the world. Put justice on the world, travel the sea, and live a happy life. Overthrow the world government and defeat the celestial dragons. Girls, all girls are mine. White stockings, black socks, and little whips. But the fun of traveling to the world of One Piece is definitely more than that. In Ron's eyes, appreciating the scenery that is different from the earth, savoring the local customs and cultures, witnessing the magic of the island, and his reasons for joining the Navy and becoming stronger are all part of the fun. In addition, discovering the truth hidden in the original work and revealing those unknown secrets is a great pleasure. In Ron's eyes, the question "who is Cap's wife?" is equivalent to what secrets One Piece hides. Because these are things that millions of One Piece fans on Earth don't know. If you can discover it yourself, that sense of accomplishment would be awesome. As if because Ron's gaze was a little too hot, Queen Rosa turned around and asked, "Sir, do you have any questions?" At the same time, she impatiently pulled her hand away from Garp's frozen palm and snorted softly. Rosa didn't know Ron, but she knew the significance of standing on Garp's right-hand side, and she didn't look down on him just because he was dressed as an errand soldier. In this regard, the gossip fire in Ron's eyes almost burst out, and he shouted, "Of course it's about you and Cap." Boom! The next second, a thick cloud of dust exploded on the spot. Smoke billowed amidst the flying sand and rocks, reaching a height of more than 10 meters. The people were immediately terrified and didn't know what was going on. Fortunately, Queen Rosa immediately signaled her guards to calm the people, and the riot was quickly quelled. Queen Rosa smiled slightly as she looked at Garp, who was kneeling on one knee and punching the ground with his fists, and Raiden, who was crawling all over the ground and jumping like an elf. The thunder fruit that disappeared for hundreds of years? No wonder you think highly of it. Ha ha, ha ha. Cap's hearty smile also had a dry day. He gritted his teeth and laughed uglier than crying. He said to Rosa, "This little guy is going out to sea for the first time and doesn't know the rules. I hope Her Majesty the Queen doesn't mind." He didn't use armament haki, otherwise Ron would have been beaten into a pulp by his punch. But even though he escaped with his life, Garp was not going to let him have peace in the days to come. Even a fool could hear the murderous intent in these words. It doesn't matter. No matter how beautiful a flower is, it is born from an ugly seed. No matter how beautiful a gem is, it needs a craftsman to carve it carefully. Watching Ron trembling with fear as he transformed from thunder into a physical form and huddled behind the dark-faced Tryon, Rosa said calmly, "That's enough for the welcome ceremony, let's go back to the palace." Yes. The reason why the Queen came to the port of Xiaoyu to welcome the naval visitors was not only because the climate here was mild and the sea was peaceful, which was suitable for entering the port, but also because her palace was at the foot of the mountain at the end of Xiaoyu. Wester Island and Magdrum Kingdom are somewhat similar, with a tall and straight snow-capped mountain in the middle. But the one in Magdrum Kingdom is just a single peak, ordinary. And the snow-capped mountain on Wester Island, called Mount St. Gall, stretches for thousands of miles. The area of the entire country is countless times larger than that of Magdrum Kingdom, and is not much less than the desert kingdom of Alabasta. At the same time, this snow-capped mountain is also an active volcano, and the island's four-season climate originates from it. The cold winds in the north were completely blocked by the active volcano, so the summer region in the south was hot and sunny all year round. In addition, the magma belt accumulated on the top of the mountain, after the air temperature changed, blew along the ridge into the autumn and spring regions, forming a four-season climate that is unique to the Great Route. Following the bustling trail unique to Xia territory, a majestic mountain fault soon appeared before the group. The upper part of the fault was covered with thick snow, hanging down like a waterfall, but at a certain point, the snow and wind were blown away by the warm wind of Xia territory, revealing the dark stone wall, which was clearly separated from the white snow on the upper part. The scene was shocking. The high cliff fault that was continuous for 1,000 meters was like this, enough to make anyone feel emotional and praise the ingenuity of nature. Not to mention that under the fault, a palace complex that was also continuous for 1,000 meters was located there. In front of the main gate of the palace, there was already a group of people waiting there. They were the guards who were welcoming the queen back to the palace. At this moment, Ron suddenly felt a murderous aura. He turned around and saw Garp staring at someone opposite him. Following his line of sight, he saw a middle-aged man with a calm face and a standard handsome uncle face. This man was wearing a jet-black heavy armor that was out of place with the queen's guards. The others stepped back half a step and stood behind him. Even without mastering the observation haki, Ron could still feel the strong murderous aura from him. This is a general who is decisive and ruthless. With this momentum, the masculine charm was overwhelming, and many maids around him looked at each other with amorous eyes, secretly sizing him up. Ron looked back and forth between the handsome face opposite him and the old face of Cap 3 times, and suddenly he realized. Fuck. Cap turned around immediately and stared at Ron with a bad look. What are you thinking about? Ron shook his head decisively. I didn't think about anything. Garp wanted to say something, but at this time Queen Rosa got off the carriage and gave Garp a look. The latter continued to glare at Ron before walking up. General Fred, this is Vice Admiral Garp of the Navy headquarters. Vice Admiral Garp, this is General Fred. As if she knew that the two were very familiar with each other, Queen Rosa did not use many words, but simply gave a brief introduction in a calm tone, and then asked. Have the accommodation issues for the Navy soldiers been prepared? Your Majesty, everything is ready. The general named Fred had a very nice voice, with a kind of hoarseness and magnetism that only a mature man could have, which was completely different from the noise of Cap's loudspeaker. Compared with this, Ron felt that Cap had no chance of winning. Well, that's good. I will return to the palace first, and you can handle the rest by yourselves. Queen Rosa said calmly, and then, with the support of a large group of guards and maids, she walked towards the depths of the palace. The other guests were not eligible to be greeted by the Queen herself. The reason for greeting Garp was because he represented the Navy headquarters and the face of the world government. As a member country, according to etiquette, the king must come out to greet him. Now that the greeting was over, Queen Rosa naturally had no need to stay here any longer. As soon as Rosa left, Ron turned his attention, looking forward to the battle between his old lover and the little bitch. Unexpectedly, Fred's first sentence changed everything. It seems the Navy still refuses to give up, Vice Admiral Garp. The Navy, not the Garp. The things involved here are as different as heaven and earth. Under Ron's slightly surprised gaze, Garp said calmly, your conspiracy will not succeed, Fred. Then I'll be looking forward to your Navy's performance, Vice Admiral Garp. 3 days from now will be the Queen's birthday banquet, and also the day I ascend the throne. You'll have to have a good drink. After saying that, Fred didn't give Garp a chance to fight back, and turned and left. Ron was a fool if he still couldn't see the problem at this time. Recalling how he was kidnapped and taken to the sea, Ron asked in a low voice, is it him? Our mission target? It's not us, it's you. Taking a deep breath, Garp loosened his clenched fist and waved his hand, go to the garrison first, and I will explain it to you slowly. Chapter 42, Rebellion in Process. The story began exactly half a year ago, in September 1514 of the Haiwan calendar. Because of the rebellion of pirates, the Queen's confidant General Jed went out to sea to suppress the pirates. Unexpectedly, Fred, the general of Hwaju, took the opportunity to rebel, sent a large number of troops to seize the core areas of Wester Island, and forced the Queen to abdicate. When the Navy received the desperate message for help from the Queen's guards, General Jed had been ambushed by an unknown force at sea and his life or death was unknown. The queen had no way out and the situation was critical. Because of the anger of Sengoku caused by the last strike, Garp was forced to take on the task of dealing with the civil unrest on West Island. At the same time, they also found out that the force that ambushed General Jade was the notorious Baroque works in the first half of the Grand Line. Normally speaking, the Navy cannot intervene when there is civil unrest in a confederation. But this time it was not just a civil strife, but Baroque works was behind the scenes fanning the flames, so the Navy had half the reason to take action. However, although they knew of the existence of Baroque works, they had no concrete evidence of Fred's contact with the other party, so it could not constitute a crime at all. Sengoku was very angry about this. Seeing that Baroque works was reaching out to the member states of the world government, the Navy could do nothing because it had no evidence. What should I do? So there goes Cap. It's a typical case of you taking the blame and then going to die. Of course, Garp's journey was very secretive. He didn't even return to the headquarters. He used the permanent compass to change his route halfway and headed west. But even so, his whereabouts were exposed and he was blocked on the road. The world government doesn't care about the internal affairs of the member states, so it's better for the Navy not to interfere. This General Fred is no ordinary man. In terms of status, he is not only the general of Hwaju's army, but also bribed some high-ranking officials of the world government and arranged an official position without real power for himself within the world government. In terms of strength, he is a strong man who is not inferior to the Vice Admiral of the Navy. Although he has not mastered the domineering power, there are many pirates who died at his hands, more than 50 million. In addition to the external reputation, the peace and tranquility of Hwaju was also created by him. In terms of fame, he is a patriotic hero respected by everyone in Flower City. He is more loved by the people than Crocodile and has a huge number of supporters. At the same time, he is the nephew of Queen Rosa and has the legitimate right of inheritance. If he wants to rebel, not everyone can stop him. Unless the Queen can completely suppress him. But after losing Jade, the powerless Queen of Flower City wanted to wrestle with her nephew who controlled the military power. The result was self-evident. After hearing this, Ron also understood how difficult this handsome Uncle Fred was. He even had a legitimate reason to rebel. But even though the atmosphere was so depressing, he still asked speechlessly, "Doesn't Queen Rosa have an heir who can succeed to the throne?" Not to mention the problem that the Queen has no family happiness at her old age. Raising children can also be a precaution for old age. One more offspring means one more hope. As long as there is another heir to the throne, it will be much more difficult for Fred to succeed without destroying his reputation. Judging from his attitude of getting rid of Jed with the help of Baroque works to avoid dirtying his hands, the threat posed by one heir is more effective than two Garps. Garp suddenly stiffened at this question. Tryon coughed and explained, "When the Queen was young, she was diagnosed with a disease that made her infertile for life, so she has no children." Forward. It seems like something big has happened. I see. Since you have no rival, you can't wait. Ron changed the subject, pretending to be enlightened. Simply put, this is a story about the Queen having been on the throne for too long and having no children, and her eldest nephew, the heir to the throne who has been the crown prince for decades, becoming dissatisfied and joining forces with foreign invaders in an attempt to overthrow the Queen's rule by force. Logically speaking, Queen Rosa will be 70 in 3 days, and in a few years her energy will decline, so it is inevitable and reasonable for her to give up the throne. For the throne, why can't she wait for a few years? But this is the horror of power. Especially when you know you have no competitors. That kind of unrestrained ambition can make even the most rational person become extremely radical and irritable. Decades of suffering have drained the last bit of patience from the eldest nephew. He decided not to wait any longer and to follow the example of Chen Sheng and Wu Guang and rise up. Fred threatened him with the name of the world government, so Garp could of course kill him without any hesitation to eliminate the trouble forever. But the consequence of breaking the rules is that all the people on his ship will be held accountable by the world government. Although Garp repeatedly expressed his dissatisfaction with the world government in public and bluntly called them rubbish, he did not dare to challenge the patience of the 5 elders at the risk of the lives and future of a whole ship of people, so he had to return home and picked up Ron, who fell from the sky on the way. At first, Ron was so weak that no one had any reason to connect him with the civil strife in Hwachu, until Ron showed his terrifying talent and perseverance, which made Zhang Guo interested. As a natural ability user who wants to join the Navy, Ron has the ability and is willing to obey orders. At the same time, because he has no file, he is not a formal Navy, so he is the best candidate to carry out the Flower City mission. As long as the Queen of Flower City stands up to protect him after the task is completed, the 5 elders will not be able to find fault with him. Most don't treat the Navy well for a very long time. When the boss doesn't treat his younger brothers well, the consequences can be quite serious. However, subsequent developments were unexpected. Just when Zhang Guo was determined to make a heroic move, because of Ron's terrifying growth rate, countless people were studying the secrets. He waited for Zifa to submit information on the lightning stimulation method. This information was soon presented to the 5 elders. If it could be put into service on a large scale, the effect would be self-evident. Therefore, they attached great importance to it and even acquiesced to the delay of the pacifists' research and development progress. Later, the instrument was confirmed to be completed and good news came from the Navy, which made the 5 elders very satisfied. The first batch of 300 Evangelion Unit 01s, the Navy only kept the 100 units in the headquarters. In addition, a full 200 instruments were sent to various branches of the CP organization. In the eyes of the 5 elders, the Navy is a group of watchdogs. But if the hounds catch their prey, they will be rewarded, even if they are the world's noble celestial dragons. Therefore, the 5 elders simply turned a blind eye to the things happening in Hwachu, and allowed the Navy to do as it pleased as long as it did not cause panic among the member states. At the same time, although both of them obey the rule, they prefer to trust Queen Rosa, who has ruled Flora for decades in a stable manner, rather than the Flora ruled by Fred, who dares to collude with the Baroque works to rebel. In the final analysis, the attitude of the 5 elders determines everything. They are just like the emperors of ancient China, above the law. This is a glimpse into the semi-feudal social system of the One Piece world. This time when you come to Hwachu, our Navy will not provide you with any help. Everything depends on you, Ron. We the Navy means that Ron is not from the same group as them. After hearing this, Ron finally understood why Capra wanted him to go out to sea. After all, Ron clearly remembered what Zephyr said to him in the prison of the Navy headquarters more than 4 months ago. That's right according to the rules. But you haven't been registered in our recruit list, so you're an outsider, and the Navy has no right to fire you. Now, 4 months have passed, and Ron, who is obsessed with cultivation, has still not been registered in the headquarters recruit list and is still considered an outsider. Even his study of the 6 styles of the Navy was in exchange for providing experimental materials to Vegapunk and improving the equipment, and the contract was signed in black and white. As long as he, a guy who is not a Navy, takes action, no one, whether it is the member states or the high-ranking officials of the world government who were bribed by Fred, will dare to challenge the 5 elders who are implicitly expressing their dissatisfaction. Chapter 43 The Queen's Tea Party. I see. I thought it was a small matter. Do you need to be so nervous? After figuring out the whole story, Ron breathed a sigh of relief. When Ron heard the first half of the story, he thought that Garp wanted him to make a decision between the Navy and the world government. Should the rules of the world government take precedence or the orders of the Navy? It's like a test. Choosing the Navy means that he is a loyal Ron who follows orders, and the world government has nothing to say. Choosing the world government means that he is a loyal Ron who follows orders, and the Navy has nothing to say. But this seems to be the same choice, but in fact it is a taboo in officialdom. The best way to deal with this situation is to ignore it and not make a choice. It is conceivable that no matter what choice he makes, his small body cannot withstand the pressure of either of these two behemoths, and this test will become an obstacle on his way to becoming stronger in the Navy. When he has nothing more to learn in the Navy, then, going out to sea as a pirate is his only way out. Officials forcing the people to rebel? No, this is just a question of loyalty. In the end, at most they would get some kind of compensation from the Navy or the world government, but they themselves would be stuck in the quagmire and unable to extricate themselves. In response to Ron's complaint, Cap looked at him with a complicated expression and did not explain much. The Navy had indeed gone too far in this matter, but the reason for this was still his fault. The Navy has produced not only Ron but also his son, Dragon. A few years ago, Dragon rebelled against the Navy and founded the Revolutionary Army, which preached the rebellious doctrine of freedom and equality under the high-pressure rule of the world government, which greatly annoyed the five elders. This pressure was transferred to the Navy, which also caused a headache for Marshal Sengoku. Therefore, because of Dragon's rebellion, Jean Guo's distrust of the Navy's rookie grew day by day. In order to tie Ron to the Navy's big ship, he did not hesitate to let Ron participate in this crisis-ridden test. If Ron had not used lightning stimulation to forcibly change the attitudes of the five elders, giving Jean Guo more choices, things might have really turned out as Ron worried. Is this also justice? After all, I was the one who let Ron down. Garp sighed inwardly and clenched his fists. Whatever. Just be responsible for growing up peacefully. I and others will clear the obstacles for you. If you want to target you, you better step over my dead body first. However, in response to Ron's optimism, Cap still reminded him, this mission is not that simple, Ron. Do you really know who your enemy is? Okay. Ron frowned and asked, besides Fred, is there anyone else? After Baroque Works completed the deal to ambush General Jed, all that was left was to wait for Fred to take power and then collect the reward. From a god's perspective, Ron could clearly say that Baroque Works dared to interfere in the internal affairs of Hwaju now, definitely for money. Because dancing powder is so expensive. The severe drought throughout Alabasta lasted for 3 full years, shaking the foundation of the country and sparking rebellions. The amount of dancing powder consumed during this period and the amount of Baileys needed is an astronomical number. Fred must have promised a huge reward to let Baroque Works, or the insidious and cunning crocodile, get involved in the quagmire of Flower City. So after the arrival of the Navy, with the old bastard's reputation on the sea as a deterrent, Baroque Works had nothing to worry about. It was a troublesome thing that might lead to someone following the clues to find out his whereabouts, ruining his plan to steal the country and losing the opportunity to avenge Whitebeard. Crocodile had to be crazy to continue to help Fred. Of course there are others, A&D. Quite a few. Garp explained with a serious face, let's not talk about what the Baroque Works hiding in the dark is up to. This time, Fred has united with other member states to form an alliance to put pressure on the Queen. No one can guarantee what they will do. We can investigate the Baroque Works, but for the others, we can only rely on you. Ron looked up, bewildered. Fuck. This nephew is such a talent. To be honest, Fred is a genius, at least when it comes to treason. Look at what he has done. If nothing unexpected happens, the pirates causing chaos in the Flower City were also bribed by him. So first he secretly bribed pirates to create chaos at the border, forcing the Queen's trusted General Jade to go out to sea to suppress the pirates, and he was ambushed and his life or death was unknown. Then he used his all-powerful intelligence ability to find the Garp route and blocked it halfway without saying a word. And now he has united with other member countries to form an alliance. Even if the Queen has a backup plan to deal with him, can she still cope with the pressure from a group of kings in economic, military, political, and other aspects? The flowers that were offered to the celestial dragons every year were not enough to make them condescend to support her. Indeed, flowers do not need to pay Tianshangjian, and there is no pressure from Tianshangjian. What they need to pay every year is the best batch of flowers. They are the only one in the Great Route and have a special status. Even though various countries joined forces to exert pressure, the people were still able to live and work in peace in the past few years. But if a country wants to prosper, it cannot just look at how much money it spends, but how much money it earns. Shipping exchanges with other countries and clearing out pirates require a lot of money. If all countries join forces to boycott Hwaju, within 10 years, the once prosperous Hwaju will definitely become a barren land on the Great Route. Rather than waiting until then and being forced to abdicate, Queen Rosa, who loves her people like her own children, might as well give up the throne now. I have to say, this move of my nephew is really cruel. Harm others and disadvantage yourself. Using the flesh and blood of Hwaju to feed the hungry wolves, I bet the queen won't be cruel enough. But this is not a hopeless situation. The reason why the member states were willing to form an alliance with Fred was nothing more than a matter of interests. They took advantage of the civil unrest in the Flower City to get a piece of the pie. If the Navy could provide greater benefits to those countries, they would throw Fred into the trash. Of course, this is the most unlikely scenario. Where would the Navy get so many benefits to distribute? In addition, finding out Fred's crime is also a solution. Because once convicted, the Navy would have sufficient reason to take action against Fred. The Navy's action is not scary, what is scary is that they made a deal with the criminals before. This is no better than making a deal with a royal family. Pirates are a thorn in the eyes of the five elders, and even high-ranking government officials cannot bear the accusation of colluding with pirates and Baroque works. At that time, the member states would definitely distance themselves from the alliance for fear of getting into trouble. The next morning, inside the naval base, Ron chewed his food in big mouthfuls, electric light flashing on his body, and he did not stop exercising even while eating. Bang dang! Another large bowl of sea monster meat was eaten up. Ron threw away the bowl, burped comfortably, and leaned back in the chair to pick his teeth. The sunlight outside the window shone through the mottled green vines. The chef who was assigned by the Queen to be in charge of the meals was sweating coldly and asked cautiously, "Mr. Ron, are you full?" These three people may look like normal people, but their appetites are simply monstrous. Having worked as the chef in the palace for many years, he had seen all kinds of storms and even the pickiest guests praised his dishes. But today, the chef began to doubt his life. It turns out that in addition to the taste and atmosphere, some diners are picky about the portion size. 3 people ate up 20 servings of food. It really is worthy of being the Navy headquarters. If he ate any more, he would even have to wait for the chef to bring him his breakfast. Well, about 70% full. It's better not to eat too much in the morning, it's not easy to digest. What else can the chef say about this? Just smile. MMP. As the lightning moved, it stimulated the muscles and created fatigue. The food was quickly digested and absorbed, replenishing the body. Feeling the bloating in his stomach dissipate, Ron approached Garp, who was also picking his teeth, and whispered, "Vice Admiral Garp, what do you think the afternoon tea party will be like?" Chapter 44, Making Trouble? Early in the morning, Queen Rosa sent someone to deliver a message saying that a tea party would be held in the palace garden this afternoon, and the Navy must be present. The Queen is not an ordinary person. Most of those who can attend her birthday banquet are members of the royal families of various countries and noble merchants who rank high in the Grand Line. These people will not do anything without profit, and the Queen's birthday banquet is a good platform. Therefore, before the formal banquet, they will talk to each other and discuss their interests. Therefore, Queen Rosa decided to hold a tea party this afternoon to let everyone talk about what should be discussed, which is also an unwritten rule. However, Hwaju was now involved in a sensitive issue of power transition, and most of those people were here to cheer Fred on. Only a few wanted to use this platform to negotiate business, and there was no need to make such a big fuss to hold a tea party, they could solve it privately. There must be some purpose behind this. Ding! Punching the toothpick into the clean dinner plate, Garp narrowed his eyes and looked out the window. Who cares what it is? Just remember that you are not a member of our navy. Ron was surprised for a second and then smiled. I understand. The palace is very busy today, with servants coming and going, delivering snacks and tea to the garden in preparation for the tea party. But amidst the bustle, it's hard to conceal a sense of inexplicable tension. Although only the upper echelons knew about Fred's attempt to abdicate, the fact that General Jed was dead or alive was unknown, and the city of Hwaju had lost a pillar, which was also a big deal. Some insiders knew the whole story and knew the intentions of the Navy and other senior officials, and they were even more terrified and dared not speak loudly. Ron turned a blind eye to all this, or rather, he didn't care. Just as they were about to follow Karp to the tea party venue, a servant came up to the three of them, saluted and said, "Mr. Ron, the Queen invites you." Really? Cap and Ron looked at each other, then nodded and said, "You go see the Queen first, we'll wait for you in the garden." Understand? After that, Ron turned into another corridor under the guidance of the servant. Cap and Tryon watched him walk away, and then continued to move forward. The tea party was held deep in the palace. The naval station was far away and still had a summer climate. But when we walked into the palace, the cool snow wind blew down from the mountains, and the climate was pleasant. When we arrived at our destination, it was already late autumn. This is also the reason why the Queen chose this place as the venue for the tea party. Nobles are often meticulous about details, and their clothes are thick and thick. It is almost impossible for people like the Navy to go out in a t-shirt. If it is too hot, I am afraid no one will be in the mood to eat snacks and drink afternoon tea. Damn it! You bitches! Don't you know how hot the tea is? As Cap and Tryon walked down the corridor into the garden, an unbearable shouting and cursing attracted their attention. At the same time, there was the crisp sound of a teacup falling to the ground and the crisp sound of a hand slapping on the face. Snapped! Tryon looked in the direction of the sound and saw a fat man as fat as a ball covering his hands angrily with a ferocious look. On the grass in front of him, there was an ordinary maid covering her face and looking around in horror. Bitch! Bitch! The fat man in fine clothes raised his hand, and his wrist was bruised and swollen. He was the one who hit the maid, but he was also the one who sprained his hand. He caught a glimpse of the contemptuous looks from the other nobles and immediately became furious, kicking the maid again and again. The maid was just an ordinary person. How could she withstand the heavy kick from the 300-pound fat man? After just a few kicks, she fell to the ground and wailed. This bastard! Tryon was also born a commoner, and he hated to see the ugly faces of nobles. He put his hand on the hilt of the sword, his eyes blazing with fire. Don't get excited, Tryon. Garp's face was also livid, but he tried hard to control his anger. Tryon knew what was important and took a deep breath to suppress his anger, then sat aside and drank tea. Perhaps he was tired from beating him. After a few hits, the fat man stopped and turned around to sit on the chair. A servant was already waiting with a cup beside him. When he saw him sit down, he quickly handed him the cold tea with a flattering look on his face. Your Highness, have some tea and calm down. Well, you are still smart. The fat man took a sip and found the tea to be at just the right temperature. He uttered a syllable through his nostrils and glanced at the servant. It is my honor to share your worries. Are you hungry? These snacks are very delicious. Very good, give it to me to try. On the other side, the fat man was drinking tea and eating snacks in a very comfortable manner, and no one asked him about the beating. Because in the eyes of the nobles present, such things were common, and they had the right to look down on the fat man, but the fat man was still a noble, and he was just a commoner, so what else could he do? On the other hand, the maid was beaten so hard that she was breathing more than breathing. It seemed that she would not live long, but no one cared. Even the guards around the garden did not dare to come up to help her, because if they angered the fat man, no one would plead for them. Lieutenant General Garp. Trion's face was extremely ugly. He knew that if she didn't get treatment, the maid would basically die. Now the guards were afraid to help because of the noble's majesty, but didn't they still have the navy headquarters? To put it bluntly, the reason why the fat guy beat people when they arrived was to give them a warning and tell them that they support Fred in this matter. The cause was in the navy, and the maid just suffered an unexpected disaster. Garp's face was filled with anger and helplessness. If this wasn't the Flower City, with his violent temper, the fat man would have flown out of the palace long ago. Really flew out. Who dares to underestimate Garp's fist? But you're so timid when trying to save someone. This is not like the you I know, Vice Admiral Garp. Suddenly, a tall figure walked in from the entrance of the garden. Ron glanced at the maid who was lying on the ground spitting blood foam, and said lightly, "Just a stupid pig, what are you hesitating about?" Garp's face suddenly became very colorful, red, blue, white, and black, and I couldn't help but want to punch him. Tryon was so frustrated that his face turned red, and his expression was complicated. But Ron didn't notice his look at the moment, because the words just now spread far in the quiet garden, and the fat man who beat the man heard it clearly. He turned his head instantly and shouted, "Who is it? Which bastard dares to scold me?" "Humph!" Ron sneered and walked out from behind Garp. When passing by Garp asked quietly, "Are you sure?" Ron responded with a reassuring look, took a few steps forward, and rubbed his ears. "Who are you calling a bastard? You son of a bitch, scolding you." The fat man answered without thinking, then immediately came to his senses, his face flushed red. "Damn it! How dare you play tricks on me?" "No, I'm playing with monkeys," Ron said sincerely. "Admit that you are a monkey, otherwise you will suffer in silence." "You." Being teased like this, the fat man calmed down. He first looked at Ron's appearance to make sure that he didn't have such a noble in his memory, then identified the clothes on the other party and sneered, "How dare you, a mere marine soldier, tease me? Do you know who I am?" "Do not know." Ron shook his head decisively. Seeing this, the fat man snorted proudly. Just as he was about to show Ron the name of his family, he suddenly heard Ron ask back, "Then do you know who I am?" "You." The fat man hesitated. He glanced at Ron with a confused look in his eyes. "Do not know." Swish! The next moment, a figure flashed by, stirring up a gust of wind. When everyone's eyes caught Ron's position again, he had already arrived in front of the fat man. Under the gaze of a group of nobles around him, Ron raised his hand and pulled forward. Snapped! A ball of flesh suddenly jumped up from the spot, flew 7 or 8 meters away, and smashed into the rockery in the corner of the garden. When he fell from the rockery, he was not dead, but half of his life was almost gone. "You don't even know who I am, you deserve to be beaten." Ron said something speechless, and it was as casual as swatting a fly away. Everyone was stunned by Ron's audacious behavior. They never thought that someone would dare to act wildly in the palace. Not to mention that the nobles gathered here were all of higher status than each other. How could he dare to do it? Even Garp was stunned by this scene. He found that he had underestimated Ron's level of violence. A noble of an allied country, maybe even a royal family, did not have to kneel down in front of the warring states, but he just started fighting. But thinking of the look Ron had just given him, he sat down calmly and asked Tryon to watch from the sidelines. Ron was smarter than him, and Cap didn't believe that he didn't know what he was doing. Since he dares to do this, he must be sure of it. "You, how dare you? Guards! Where are the guards? Someone is committing a crime." The frightened nobles quickly calmed down after the panic. He was just a miscellaneous soldier. He dared to attack the nobles of the allied countries. He was dead now. Soon, a group of guards led by Fred poured in from all directions. If nothing unexpected happens, the Queen will hand over the throne to him at the birthday banquet the day after tomorrow. The rebellious genius Fred cannot fail to pay attention to the trick of replacing the palace guards. He had been hiding in the dark from the beginning. After all, he was still the general of Hwaju and was not qualified to participate in the tea party of the nobles. At the same time, he also wanted to see what Garp and others would do. But unexpectedly, Ron dared to commit the crime in public. Fred was overjoyed. After a moment's hesitation, he immediately led his men into the garden. Amid the sound of swords clashing, he surrounded Ron and shouted angrily, "How dare you hurt someone in the palace? Come on, capture him! Wait a minute!" Suddenly, a lazy voice sounded in everyone's ears. Fred was very familiar with this voice, as he had heard it since he was a child. Her Majesty the Queen. Chapter 45 A Sudden Transformation. Rosa arrives at the critical moment when Ron is about to be arrested. No matter how many little thoughts she had, Rosa was still the queen. The nobles did not want to be labelled as ignorant of etiquette, which was the foundation of their nobility, so they bowed obediently, with a large number of people doing so. Even Fred is no exception to this. After the ceremony, Fred glanced at the fat man being carried, and then said to Rosa, "Your Majesty, this naval clerk injured His Highness Andrew and committed an unforgivable mistake. Your Majesty, please punish him severely." As soon as Fred opened his mouth, the nobles around him started to make a noise. "Yes, Your Majesty, he is too bold and must be severely punished. For the glory of the nobility. The indignation cannot be appeased unless these untouchables are killed. That fat guy is actually a prince of a country?" Surrounded by the crowd, Ron rolled his eyes, looking a little surprised. But when he thought about the Queen's summons just now, he felt fearless again. By the way, he winked at Queen Rosa and pointed at the maid who was kneeling beside her, trying hard to stand up. As the Queen of the Flower City, Rosa had seen all kinds of storms and waves, and she saw through Ron's intentions at a glance. If Ron acted as a naval errand boy, no one could protect him, not even Garp. There was a clear line between civilians and nobles, which was even above the law. There was no difference between errand boys and civilians. But, what if it's not a miscellaneous soldier? So Rosa ignored Fred and the others and turned to walk towards the maid. Fred suddenly had a bad feeling and reached out to stop her. But at this moment, Ron stepped forward and blocked him with his broad back. Fred tried to stop her, but the Queen's hand was on his back and he couldn't push Ron away. "This kid!" There was a hint of surprise in his eyes, and he exerted more force. The burst of lightning directly shocked Fred and made him retreat half a step. Fred took his hand back and rubbed his fingers silently, his face gloomy. "Are you the rookie in the Navy, the user of the Thunder Fruit, Ron?" He could even investigate Garp's route, so how could he not find out Ron's information? Not to mention that Garp punched him in the port, exposing his identity. But Ron was still a member of the Navy, and as long as he was a member of the Navy, he had nothing to fear. So Fred never paid any attention to Ron's appearance until he was struck by lightning, and then he finally remembered the information. In response to this question, Ron grinned, "General Fred is really well informed and knows everything. It's true that I am the user of the Thunder Fruit, but I'm not a rookie in the Navy. Nanny." Fred's pupils shrank, and he turned around to look at Cap, who was eating a donut with a mouth full of grease, and he understood. "That's it. Are you so shameless as to stop me? If the Navy itself does not admit that Ron is a Marine, then who can prove that he is a Marine? If Ron was not a Marine, then what other identity could make him so fearless?" At this time, Rosa walked up to the maid, and with a hint of indifference unique to a queen, she asked condescendingly, "Tell me, who hit you?" "Your Majesty, I, cough cough." The maid was startled and choked up. She didn't answer directly. After all, so many nobles around her looked at her unkindly, but she looked up at Ron, who was arguing with Fred, and hesitated. If I don't tell the truth, he will definitely be in big trouble, right? It doesn't matter if I die, but I can't let him get hurt. She was the only one who stood up to speak for a lowly person like herself. Knowing that she didn't have much time left, the maid had the courage to bring down the emperor at the cost of her life. Thinking of this, the maid gritted her teeth, lowered her head and said, "It's His Highness Andrew." Bold. The first person to have an attack was none other than Queen Rosa. Under Fred's surprised gaze, Queen Rosa said angrily with a gloomy face, "Only I have the right to deal with my maid. An outsider is bullying my maid in my palace. Does the Ruisi kingdom want to go to war with my Hwachu?" After hearing these words, the nobles who had just formed a united front were a little confused. What the hell? Start a war? Coming from the Queen of Flower City, this is no small matter. As mentioned before, the land area of Flower City is not smaller than that of Alabasta, and there is no sand crocodile to hinder it. The strength of the country is well known throughout the Grand Line. Otherwise, it would not be possible to make so many member countries of the world government jealous and come to support Fred. Although Ruisi Kingdom is also an allied country, its territory is small and its military force is poor. It would be easy for the private soldiers of most of the nobles present to destroy it, let alone Hwachu. This is also the reason why the fat man is looked down upon. Therefore, if the war breaks out with Hwachu, Ruisi Kingdom is doomed to be defeated. Fred was also confused at this moment, because if a war really broke out, it would definitely be justified and even he would not be able to escape. Regardless of the status of Hwachu and Ruisi Kingdom in the sea, Andrew, as a guest, bullied the host's maid in the host's palace. Even if he was weaker than the other party, Queen Rosa had sufficient reason to declare war on Ruisi Kingdom. And Fred, as a general, must lead the way once the Queen declares war on Ruisi Kingdom. In this case, there is no telling when his throne will be pushed down. He immediately knelt on one knee and tried to dissuade them, "Your Majesty. The war between the two countries would involve too much, and countless people would be torn apart and killed. Please think twice." The nobles around were all silent at this moment, for fear of giving Rosa a chance to explode. No country present could challenge Hwachu alone. Even if the queen abdicated in the end, Fred would have to obey the instructions of the previous king and complete the war to destroy the kingdom of Ruisi before he could sit firmly on the throne. At this moment, Fred hated Ron and Andrew at the same time. If it weren't for these two people, nothing would have happened at today's tea party, and his throne would be a sure thing. Now, I just hope that the Queen will take back what she said because of the cruelty of war. After all, they are his relatives, and Fred is very clear about Rosa's nature of loving people like her own children. Yeah, that makes sense. It's not worth it to waste time and money on such a waste. Under Fred's nervous gaze, Rosa said something that made everyone feel relieved. Then she raised her hand and pointed at Andrew, "Throw this fat pig out. If you dare to say one more word of nonsense, old Andrew will be prepared to destroy the country." The old, turbid eyes were filled with majesty at the moment, and no noble dared to look at her. Even Fred, in front of this majesty, had a face as dark as ink and did not dare to refute. This is the bearing that a great king should have. Overbearing. Compared with Cobra, the indecisive king who means well but does bad things, they are really one in heaven and one on earth. With such a loving and domineering king guarding it, the prosperity of the Flower City is no fluke. Ron's eyes sparkled as he watched from behind, and he suddenly understood why the carefree Garp had fallen in love with Queen Rosa before. Although the relationship between the two was due to the reason of fists or justice, it was impossible to ask, but as long as you are attentive, even a blind person can see it. Just then, he saw Rosa waving at him and trotted over. His Majesty. Noticing Ron, Fred had an idea. Wait, didn't I come here to cause trouble for him? Although Andrew has been thrown out now, it is still a heinous act to dare to attack the nobles. He immediately lowered his head and said uprightly, "Your Majesty, although His Highness Andrew was wrong first, this man is just a commoner. It is also a big mistake to attack a noble. Please punish him severely. These nobles are here to support him, so he must show a sufficient attitude." However, Rosa ignored him again and said to Ron, "Captain Ron, you did a great job on this matter. If there are others who dare to offend my Majesty in my palace, I allow you to kill them first and report later. If anything goes wrong, I will take the responsibility. Are you worried? You are about to abdicate, what are you worried about? In the end, I still took the blame. And Ron, captain of the guard?" Fred paused, raised his head in disbelief and looked at Carp. "To stop me, you, the Navy, are really generous." Chapter 46 Winning over Ron. The captain of the palace guards, the commander of the guards who protect the palace and the queen, what kind of position is that? If we really talk about status, he's not even as good as a third-class noble. But the person who can hold this position is definitely the person the king trusts the most. Your status may be higher than his, but you cannot be higher than the king, then he is truly second to none. The reason why Fred designed an ambush to kill Jed was not only because he was the strongest fighter around the queen and was loyal to her without any second thoughts, but also because he served as the captain of the palace guards. As long as Jed exists, his plan to force the emperor to abdicate will never come true. Of course, he could also march his army into the palace and force a change of dynasty by violence, but Fred was too noble to be like those pirates and reckless men, using bloody terror to eliminate dissidents. After getting rid of Jed, the first thing he did was to replace the guards and place his own confidants in the palace for this reason. Fred thought that with the birthday party approaching, there would be no changes in the position of chief guard of the palace, but he did not expect that the Navy would actually give Ron to Rosa. It's really a gift. It has always been the case that people from member states quit the member states and join the Navy, and people without a Navy quit the Navy and join the member states. This is an irreversible job reversal. Anyone who quits the Navy and joins other forces will never be trusted by the Navy again. As the user of the Thunder Fruit, Ron is known as the strongest natural type and has a bright future. Fred never thought that the Navy would push Ron to the position of chief of the palace guards. In this way, Ron will never be able to return to the Navy. At first he thought the Navy was shameless and refused to acknowledge Ron as a Navy officer. Now he realized that this was not shamelessness at all, but sheer recklessness. When Fred came to his senses, he found that the garden was empty. Ron had transformed from a janitor to the chief of the palace guards. Rosa had given him the right to execute first and report later. If someone found an excuse to throw him out like Andrew and humiliate him, what could they do? Are we really going to war with Hwaju? What kind of international joke are you kidding? It was certain that they would continue to support Fred, after all, it was a promise made. But before the day when the Queen announced her abdication, these nobles did not want to provoke Ron, who was obviously not an ordinary person. They were using Fred's name to act arrogantly and express their stance, while the Queen was directing Ron to act tough and threaten people's lives. The strength and prosperity of Flower City made them have a lofty status in the Grand Line. It also made Ron, a mere captain of the palace guards, have higher status and position than most of the nobles present. Cap and Tryon also left. Ron was now the captain of the palace guards, so there was no reason for him to go back to the naval base with them. Although the two were equally confused, they were not worried about Ron joining the Flower City camp. After all, apart from them, not many people know that Ron is a temporary worker. Ron, who is not even a formal Navy officer, became the captain of the guards in Hwaju. What's wrong with that? There's nothing wrong, buddy. Now the only people left in the garden were him and Ron. Glancing around, Ron was sitting on a chair, leisurely stuffing snacks into his mouth. Noticing Fred looking over, Ron smiled and said, "General Fred is thinking so deeply, is he thinking about how to kill me? Taking a deep breath, Fred's expression became serious and murderous intent filled his eyes. What if I say yes? Well, it will be troublesome. Fred thought Ron was saying that he would be in trouble, and sneered disdainfully. But Ron's next words made the corners of his mouth twitch, and he didn't know how to respond. Because Ron said, as a user of special abilities, you naturally have your own weaknesses. However, lightning can use high temperatures to destroy anything that is not beneficial to it, such as insulating rubber that restrains lightning. If it cannot be destroyed, you can also dodge it with speed, such as the natural enemy of special abilities, sea stone. So if you want to kill me, in addition to having an absolute advantage in hard power and escaping faster than me, you must also learn armament haki. Oh, by the way, does General Fred know armament haki? In the first half of the Grand Line, there are basically no haki users, and many people regard it as a legend. For example, in the East China Sea, the Devil Fruit ability user is also a legend. But to ask Fred if he knows haki is a bit of an underestimation of the world's heroes. Fred moved his lips a few times. I know. Then, will it? Fred. Taking a few deep breaths, Fred suppressed the urge to beat someone up, and suddenly smiled. You are very good, Captain Ron. You are also a genius, at least when it comes to rebellion. Fred. Stop talking nonsense. Captain Ron, you can't go back to the Navy now, do you want to come and help me? Okay. Ron groaned in doubt and looked up at Fred. If I heard correctly, you want to win me over. That's right. After saying this, Fred felt much more relaxed. You and Hwaju are already tied to the same warship. Even if the rebellion fails this time, the problem of my aunt having no offspring will not be solved. I will still be the future king, and you will still serve under me. In that case, why don't you cooperate with me? The Navy's goal is just to protect Aunt Rosa, right? Who is the ruler of Flower City is not important to you at all, right? Seeing Fred's confident and handsome face, Ron fell silent. Speaking of the Queen's childlessness, Ron was also very depressed. He had already imagined 100,000 melodramatic plots between the old bastard and Queen Rosa, but Queen Rosa did have no children, and her only relative was her nephew who was rebelling against him. In this semi-feudal world of One Piece, succession to the throne through royal bloodline is an unshakable foundation. As for the Navy's true purpose, Ron was unsure, but he didn't care. Whether the Queen's life or the harmony of Flower City is more important is up to the old bastard. He only needs to follow orders. But this is also an opportunity. Ron dropped the snack he had just taken a bite of, picked up the teapot and filled it with water, then wiped off the water stains, with a faint smile on his face. You want to win me over, but you'll have to pay a price. How about the information about Baroque works? Fred also had a smile on his handsome face, and he and Ron stared at each other without giving in. After a moment, Ron retracted his gaze and continued eating his cake. General Fred is such a cruel method. I guess you have completely wiped out all traces of your contact with them? The rest of the people who knew about it should have been killed as well. Fred smiled at this. I'm not going to sit there and wait for 4 whole months. If you can support me in taking the throne, I will hand over the intelligence of Baroque works to you. It is up to you, Mr. Ron, whether to give this credit to the Navy or keep it for yourself. In addition, once I inherit the throne, Ron's position as the captain of the guard will be unbreakable. Even the position of a general is not impossible. In order to win over Ron, Fred was determined to get the information about Hwaju's general and Baroque works. The reason was the same as what he thought. From the Navy to the chief of the palace guard, Ron was already tied to the flower capital, and there was no possibility of him going back. In addition, as the user of the Thunder Fruit, Ron was also a powerful force worth winning over. As for whether Ron would rebel against him in the future, it would be much more difficult for someone who is not of royal blood to go on stage. It's really a big deal. Ron was surprised for a second, then smiled and exclaimed. Mr. Ron deserves this gift. Fred raised the corner of his mouth, without changing his expression. Both of them had faint smiles on their faces, like two cunning foxes. I have to say that this Fred is quite to Ron's liking. He has brains, strength, scheming, and determination. Cooperating with such a tyrant, as long as he doesn't make any mistakes, will definitely bring more benefits than disadvantages. But not enough. Ron's face suddenly darkened, and he whispered, I have a question that has never been answered, so I hope General Fred can tell me the truth. Are you asking why the 5 elders have already acquiesced to the Navy's interference in Flower City's internal affairs, but still want to push you to the forefront? Even though his height had increased dramatically due to learning the 6 styles, standing in front of Ron, Fred was still stronger and more muscular than Ron, wearing a black heavy armor. Especially the strange light flashing in his eyes made Ron's heart sink. But he still nodded and said fearlessly, that's right. Although there was no Tiankang as an option for this mission, since even the 5 elders had acquiesced, why was Garp still hesitant? In the Navy camp, the attitude of the 5 elders was everything. Garp could have just rushed into the palace and killed Fred, there was no need to go through so much trouble to ask him to take action. As long as Fred died. Alliance of member nations? That's a joke. So Ron must find out the reason. Chapter 47 Attack. The palace of Xiao has a pleasant climate because of the cold wind from the snowy mountains. The garden is full of flowers in full bloom, which is beautiful beyond words. But in this beautiful painting, 2 auras continued to rise, forming a real storm that destroyed everything in the garden. On one side, there was a terrifying thunder tornado, slowly drifting, leaving no grass behind and destroying everything in its path. On the other side, there was thick black smoke, with faint traces of guerrilla fire, setting the earth on fire. Countless people looked in the direction of the garden in awe, secretly frightened by the competition between the 2 forces. Oh, I hope Fred can understand everything I do. Deep in the palace, Queen Rosa stood by the window, her brows showing a hint of sadness compared to usual. He will understand, sire. A sturdy figure dressed in black stood behind the queen and bowed in response. I hope so, hey? Looks like the winner has been decided. In the distance, the thunder tornado suddenly shrank and then spread outward. At the same time, the dark smoke also spread outward and dissipated into the air. When everything was calm, the entire garden disappeared, leaving only a completely destroyed ruin in its place, without any trace of life. A few minutes later, the guard announced that Ron wanted to see him. At this time, Ron had changed into the unique green leaf uniform of the Flower City Guards, and pinned a carefully selected white rose on his chest, which meant that he regarded Queen Rose as his heart. After the announcement, Ron walked into the Queen's bedroom and knelt on one knee. I have accomplished your mission, Your Majesty. You didn't tell him the truth, Ron. Rosa didn't look as domineering as before. She was just an old lady who was worried about her younger generation. Even a deaf person could hear the sadness in her tone. Of course not, and there's plenty of time. It is good. Rosa raised her head and looked at Ron with admiration. Everything is up to you, Mr. Ron. Understand? Half an hour later, at the naval base. You mean, you pretended to surrender and got Fred to reveal the whereabouts of Baroque works? Cap looked at Ron in surprise and circled around him. I never thought that a guy like you with thick eyebrows and big eyes, Ron, would actually be so scheming. Garp was very surprised that Ron would become the chief guard of the palace, but considering that Ron had important responsibilities and needed a suitable identity to move around in the palace, this was not surprising. However, Fred actually tried to win over Ron and even exchanged the information about the Flower City Army General and Baroque works for Ron's support for his promotion, which surprised Garp greatly. Not to mention, he was pretending to surrender. Ron rolled his eyes and said unhappily, Don't give me that. Fred is just hoping that the Navy will find Baroque works and use them to kill people. Even if I don't pretend to surrender to him, he will secretly leak information about Baroque works and ask us to help him get rid of these hyenas. After taking a sip of water, Ron asked, "What should we do next?" It looks like there's no chance of doing anything to Fred. Since Fred dared to get rid of the donkey after it has served its purpose, he must have erased all traces of his connection with Baroque works. Even if the Navy arrested all the people from Baroque works, they would never find any substantial evidence. After all, it was just as he said, a full 4 months. How could he leave trouble behind when he knew the Navy would not give up? So the Navy's way of convicting him and saving the Queen was a dead end. Even if the people from Baroque works were arrested, Queen Rosa would still face pressure from the Allied nations to abdicate. All they could do was to protect the Queen during the turmoil. That's it. And what Ron said was right. Fred was eager for the Navy to take the initiative to eliminate the remaining forces of Baroque works on the island and kill them. Once the Navy army set out, the palace would be in turmoil. By then, dividing the troops was the only outcome. "Are you sure you can protect Her Majesty from Fred's attack, Ron?" "This matter involves the safety of Queen Rosa," Tryon asked seriously. In response, Ron shook his head readily, "No. Fred is a user of the superhuman coal fruit. I can crush him in terms of lethality. Plus, with my natural elemental physique, I will definitely win in a fight. But if he is not aiming to win but to kill the Queen, then the lethality of the thunder fruit and the coal fruit will be a disadvantage and there will be no way to defend against it." The competition with Fred in the afternoon, in addition to creating a no-man's land to isolate outsiders from knowing what they talked about, was also a test between the two sides. As Ron said, if it really came to a life-and-death confrontation, Fred would not be his opponent. Without the armament haki and not being restrained by the attribute, the control power of the thunder fruit is unparalleled. But Fred is not a pushover either. His hard power is almost the same as his, and his coal smoke can ignite a fire anywhere. With the flammable and explosive properties of coal dust, he wants to kill anyone, and Ron can't stop him. It's not that he is not an opponent, but that he can't protect him. This situation is the most frustrating. Hearing the answer, Tryon frowned tightly. He glanced at Garp and found that the latter had his eyes closed, obviously caught in a difficult dilemma. So he stood by helplessly, waiting for Garp to make a decision. After a long moment, Garp put his hands on the edge of the table and growled, "We are the Navy. Let's do it tonight." After saying this, Garp unloaded it in one breath and sat back in his chair. But there were 2 palm-sized pieces of wood missing from the table. "Don't worry, Vice Admiral Garp, the Queen will be safe. I will definitely protect her." Seeing this, Ron, who rarely did anything, comforted him. In return, Cap looked suspiciously and asked, "Did you eat my donuts?" "Ron, you shouldn't have any expectations on that old bastard. And who wants your protection?" As Ron stared in shock, Cap had a carefree smile on his face, and his bear-like and tiger-like body emitted visible murderous flames. "This time, I will personally take action. It's night, the moon and stars are sparse." Because the political power in the royal capital was unstable, even though the Queen's birthday banquet was approaching, the residents of the royal capital had to go to bed early and did not dare to wander the streets in the middle of the night. Under the bright moonlight, figures passed by the roofs and corners of the alleys, moving forward quickly. Their movements were orderly and swift, and everyone mastered the 6 styles of shaving, and their speed was so fast that ordinary people would think they were dazzled if they saw it. This is a team of elite Navy soldiers, the real elites with an average DAO power of around 500. They are the strongest force under Garp. And they are led by Ron and Tryon. Don't ask where Cap is. The direction that Ron and others were heading towards was a jungle in the summer region, which was also the hiding place of the members of the Baroque works. According to the information provided by Fred, the members of the Baroque works did not evacuate directly after Jed fell into the sea, but hid in Wester Island waiting for him to take power and pay the reward. Although 4 months have passed and some people have left one after another, there are still hundreds of people left there. To be on the safe side, Cap sent out this elite force and even asked Roan and Tryon to act together. With the cooperation of a naturalist controlling the field and a swordsman attacking the enemy, they could not let any enemy go. They are all little superheroes whose power exceeds the limit. The mobility of this team of only 30 people is terrifying. In less than half an hour, they passed the town and arrived at a remote mountain forest. Behind the hillside was a dense jungle that looked no different from anywhere else. But Tryon, who had mastered the observation haki, clearly sensed something and pulled Ron, who was about to move forward, and gestured. Have. Sentinel. 3. Nodding, Ron allowed Tryon to call 3 team members behind him, then pulled out the parchment map and pointed out their respective targets. Thunder and lightning were definitely not suitable for the task of clearing out the sentries. Although they could kill them at the same time, the noise was too loud. After waiting for a while, 3 lifelike nightingales were heard in the jungle, and Tryon called the troops to continue moving forward. At this time, Ron's mission came. When Tryon led his men into the jungle and calculated the time, Ron's body was surrounded by lightning. He stomped on the ground hard, turned into a streak of lightning, and flashed into the sky. Thunder and lightning originally come from the sky. As long as Ron wanted, he could float in the sky for half an hour without falling. Limited by his own strength, Ron couldn't even change direction flexibly on the ground, let alone air combat, so it was not considered a high-level flying skill, but if he just stayed afloat and then mindlessly released thunder, it would be very easy. And his mission tonight is to provide high-altitude reconnaissance and air support for Tryon. Boom! Chapter 48 The Terrible Possibility. The jungle still looks like a jungle, but deep in the forest, a group of houses have been built. This is indeed very strange. Why did the Baroque works not leave after completing the mission, but instead stayed here for half a year? However, combined with the information provided by Fred in the afternoon, Ron already had the answer in his mind. The reason why Garp cannot do whatever he wants is actually the attitude of the 5 elders. However, unlike the previous unilateral dissatisfaction of the 5 elders, this time, the source comes from the member countries. The day before they were about to set off, the king of one of the member states somehow learned of the Navy's plan, and in front of Mary Joachim and the 5 elders, he accused Garp of using the Navy's military force to interfere in his country's internal affairs. He also organized other member states to file a complaint against the Navy together. This gives the 5 elders a headache. What should we do now that the member states are already dissatisfied before Cap even takes any action? If they release it and then take it back, where will the 5 elders save their faces? If it is not taken back, the member states will cause trouble again. So Garp still can't take action. The only one who can take action is Ron, who has no file and is not under his jurisdiction. And the guy who caused the trouble was the king of Alabasta, Nefertari Cobra. Nefertari Cobra. Hearing the name, Ron's heart sank. Back in the afternoon in the garden, surrounded by thunder and lightning and black coal dust, the two did not have to worry about their conversation being leaked. Yes, it is a powerful country that is comparable to Arhana. King Cobra loves his people like his own children, just like my aunt, and is deeply loved by the people. At this point, Fred, who was always confident, showed a rare hint of surprise, but what's strange is why Alabasta knew what happened in the Flower City, and King Cobra even changed his usual behavior and took the initiative to go to Marijoa to speak for me. Although they are both descendants of the 20 royal families of creation, the Nefertari family and the celestial dragon family of Marijoa have never been of one mind. This generation of King Cobra is a typical outlier, and his attitude towards the world government can hardly be described as respectful, let alone obedient. On the contrary, at the just concluded 1514 World Conference, when discussing the issue of the Revolutionary Army, Cobra also accused the kings of other member states of not taking their citizens seriously, which gave the Revolutionary Army an opportunity to take advantage, making a group of kings extremely embarrassed. Such a good guy would actually stand up for a traitor like himself? Maybe, the high-ranking officials you bribed within the world government are helping you. Ron looked at Fred strangely. Do they have that ability? Fred didn't believe that those pustules could do such a earth-shattering thing, but this was the only speculation that made sense at the moment. When the storm dissipated, Fred suddenly asked, "You asked me so many questions. I also want to ask you a question, Captain Ron." Ron, who was about to leave, turned back and said, "Go ahead. Why would the Navy abandon you? Do you know that there has never been a precedent of people who left the Navy and served in a member country returning? I will answer this question after you become king." Fred watched Ron's back as he walked away and silently clenched his fists. Do I become a king? Not to mention Fred, perhaps the five elders would also be wondering why Alabasta knew what happened in the Flower City thousands of miles away, and why Nefertari Cobra, a descendant of the 20 royal families of creation, would advise them about the affairs of the Flower City. But in Ron's eyes, there was a traceable path. Baroque works intervened in the civil unrest in Flower City, and the boss behind the scenes was the national hero of Alabasta, Crocodile. Cobra would do something so uncharacteristic, there was no secret at all for the original fans, because Ron dared to assert that it was not Cobra at all. Instead, he is a senior executive of Baroque Works, the user of the mimicry fruit, Mr. Tu Von Clay. How dare the sand crocodile, who has eaten the heart of a bear and a leopard, deceive the five elders? Or is Von Clay so bold as to play Cobra in front of the five elders? Ron didn't care. What he cared about was Crocodile's determination to rebel in Flower City, which was exposed by this incident. There is only one purpose for letting Von Clay impersonate Cobra and give advice to the five elders, accusing Garp of interfering in the internal affairs of the member states with the Navy's military power, so that the Navy will be cautious and do such a bold and unforgivable thing. That is this rebellion, they must succeed. But, what's the reason? Crocodile went to Alabasta because he knew the trace of the ancient weapon Pluto. What reason did he have to interfere in the Flower City thousands of miles away? Regarding Crocodile's defeat, one of the 10 unjust cases in One Piece, Ron spent some time studying Crocodile. An extremely self-centered and ambitious avenger. If you say he does things without a purpose, Ron really has to sympathize with the five elders for 5 minutes, 1 minute for each person. So, ancient weapons. The design of Pluto is in the Seven Waters City in the New World. The historical text pointing to the Seven Waters City is in the basement of the Alabasta Royal Funeral Hall. The Sea King is a mermaid princess who appears once every few hundred years on Mermaid Island. The clue is in the historical text on the top of the huge pod in Arpa Yard. These two have nothing to do with Flower City, but Crocodile is determined to cause civil unrest in Flower City, and even left a large number of people to hide in the jungle. Ron's expression turned serious. It's just a possibility. But it is a very scary possibility. Even if it is not an ancient weapon, there is a high probability that it is related to the historical text. There are 3 generals under Crocodile left in the camp, namely Mr. 1 Darth Bonus, Mr. 3 Galdino, and Mr. 3's partner, Miss Golden Week. The senior executives of Baroque Works have one thing in common, that is, except for Mr. Tu Von Clay, a new she-male who firmly believes that he is both a man and a woman and therefore does not need a partner, the other executives are in groups of 2, 1 man and 1 woman. Of course, it is not known whether there is any idea to hide his whereabouts because of the special nature of the fruit. After all, Darth Bonus did not know what Von Clay really looked like until the original work was opened. Miss Two Fingers is Darth Bonus' partner, but if she doesn't have any special work on weekdays, she usually works as an intelligence agent and part-time assassin in the Spider Bar in Alabasta, and does not appear at the same time as Darth Bonus. But just looking at the current lineup, it can be seen that Baroque Works has invested a huge amount of money. Darth Bonus, Crocodile's #1 killer, with a bounty of 5,500 million Baileys. Galdino, a candle man whose fighting power is no less than that of Darth Bonus, has a bounty of 4,500 million Baileys. Little Girl's Golden Week, And the real fighting power of the two of them is definitely higher than the bounty. The world government and the Navy set a bounty based on the threat a person poses to them, and the two killers would not go against the Navy for no reason. As mentioned before, more often than not, Baroque Works is mainly engaged in arms trade, making money to buy powder, dancing powder. The fact that the Navy offered such a high bounty for a dark world killer who was hiding was already a testament to the strength of the two men. Haven't you found anything today? It was late at night, but the camp had just finished a busy day and started preparing dinner. Bonus stuffed the unpalatable food in his hand into his throat and swallowed it, looking at the sky, as if asking, or talking to himself. I guess this so-called treasure must be a mistake made by the boss. There is obviously nothing here. The candle man Galdino has a strange setting. His mood is synchronized with the flame burning at the end of his three-shaped hair, just like Charmander. But now, after several months of living in the jungle with insufficient food and clothing, the flame is extremely dim and almost extinguished. Since the candles made from the wax fruit are as hard as iron, the tools needed to dig for treasure, everyone's homes and other sundries, as long as they are not sticky to fire, are all made from it. The boss ordered them to minimize the possibility of being discovered, so they should use local materials whenever possible. Fred paid a huge price to find out where these guys were hiding so as to eliminate them in the future. Bonus remained silent. In the past, if Dino dared to question the boss, he would have severely punished him. But after half a year of persistence, even he couldn't help but have some thoughts. Keep working hard, after all, there are only 2 days left. In the end, Bonus couldn't say any words of reprimand. He shook his head, put the tableware aside, and walked towards his room. Dino chewed the unpalatable food and said to himself, whatever. Even if I can't bring back the treasure, I can bring back the reward without worrying about the boss getting angry. Ugh! What the hell is this? It's disgusting. A little brother beside him looked at the bowl of rice that was thrown aside with a painful look on his face, swallowed his saliva, and said, Sir, that's wild boar fat, it smells very good. What smells so good? Can you eat such a big piece of oil? Hey! Suddenly, Dino discovered that a blue crack appeared on the glowing wild boar oil. At the same time, a deafening explosion sounded behind them. 30 million volts thunderstorm. Chapter 49 Suppressing Bandits. 30 million volts thunderstorm. With the help of his jumping power, Ron reached a high altitude, and with his hands spread out, thousands of electric eels burst out, outlining a fire tree and silver flower in the night sky. Today's thunderstorm is incomparable to the power when it was tested in the recruit camp. Not only is the power doubled, but the coverage area is also vast and boundless. Muffled thunders continued one after another, and after a few breaths, the entire night sky was as bright as day. In the sky, lightning in the shape of arrows was scattered everywhere. The sound of the electric current was endless, making people's scalps numb. Mr.3 looked back and saw this scene, he was completely stunned. It was not until the lightning arrows began to rain down on the ground and the threat of death became more and more intense that he screamed, "Be careful! Enemy attack!" At the same time, he bent down slightly and supported his hands on the ground. Balls of wax rolled and woven like white waves, forming a solid candle wall 3 meters high and 1 meter thick, blocking in front of him. Wax fruit candle wall. Candle? Mr. 3 Galdino. High in the sky, with the help of the lightning that filled the sky, Ron could clearly see the white shield on the ground. This guy does have some abilities in the original work, because no one could restrain him in the early stages, and the protagonists, the Straw Hat Pirates, suffered a lot at his hands. The candles formed by the wax fruit are as hard as iron, have high plasticity and are unpredictable, and can be said to be both offensive and defensive. However, there is a fatal weakness, that is, candles are extremely afraid of high temperatures. And now he met himself. You should know that the destructive power of lightning is mainly reflected in the terrible high temperature that can instantly cause the air to vibrate and form thunder. If it's a senior cotter, I can still keep you for a while. In the sky, Ron, like a god examining the mortal world, pronounced a sentence on each member of the underground Baroque works. With a thought, the lightning arrows in the sky floated outward, leaving a blank area. There were still some lightning arrows flying towards Galtino, but if he couldn't even block these few, there would be no point in holding back. Boom, crack! The lightning arrow was extremely fast and hit the candle shield in an instant. The strong candle that could hold out for 3 seconds in the flames was instantly pierced by the lightning. At the same time, the remaining arrows showed no mercy and attacked without leaving any gaps. The entire shield did not hold out for even a second and directly disintegrated into countless hot wax liquids that scattered in all directions. Nanny! Such a terrible attack made Gardino's soul tremble. Without time to think about anything else, he wrapped himself in wax and was blown high up by the impact force brought by the lightning explosion. Even Mr. 3, a senior cotter, was so unbearable, so the other ordinary members were even more unable to withstand the attack of thunder and rain. Every time a thunderstorm struck, one person was burned to charcoal by the lightning. The deafening thunder lasted less than 3 seconds, but 3 seconds later, the entire camp was engulfed in flames, the branches were charred and smoking, and the ground was dry and cracked. There were screams, wails, and the crackling sound of burning branches, and the unique smell of ozone and burnt protein filled the night air. The members who were able to stand were terrified, looking at the camp that had turned into a living hell in an instant, at a loss. They were able to stand not because they were too strong, but because they were lucky enough not to be hit in the thunder and rain. Wow! In the ruins of a house, Mr. 1 lifted the stone slab on his body and looked up at the sky with a serious expression. Through the moonlight, fire, and smoke, in the sky, a figure with his lower body wrapped in lightning remained in a posture, with his back against the bright moon, looking at everything leisurely. The air was filled with the stench of roasted human flesh, and the whole scene seemed like the end of the world. Who is he? Can he control lightning? The user of the thunder fruit. The Navy did not publicize Ron's existence. They did not dare to go out casually because of the orders of the boss, so Das Bonus had no idea that a figure like Ron had appeared in the world in the past 6 months. But this did not prevent him from inferring from Ron's attack that the person coming was the user of the thunder fruit, and at the same time, he was invincible. Trouble. Das Bonus sighed secretly. His countless experiences of life and death had given him a good mentality. Looking at the ruined camp and the large number of dead and wounded subordinates around him, he took a deep breath and said, "Mr. 3. If you are not dead, break out quickly." Click, click. Not far from him, a half-melted candle ball melted away, revealing Gardino inside, whose body was covered with extensive burns. He did use candles to block the terrible high temperature brought by lightning, but the temperature of the melted wax was also not low. He was wrapped in the ball and had nowhere to hide. He was almost scalded and turned into a beggar's chicken. Knowing the power of thunder and lightning, Gardino nodded and shouted without any nonsense. "Everyone, scatter and break out. He's alone, whoever can run away should be the first." Suddenly, the surviving members of the Baroque workshop became spirited, and without further ado, they started to head into the jungle. Faced with a monster that could wipe out most of them with one move, these people had no idea of resisting at all. At this moment, they only regretted that their parents gave them 2 less legs so they couldn't run fast enough. But what they didn't know was that Ron's goal was to catch them all in one fell swoop, and he would definitely not allow anyone to escape. Now that they were running away in different places, Ron would definitely chase them. This would give Gardino and Das Bonus a chance to escape. They were just bait, cannon fodder to attract Ron's attention. This is the style of Baroque works. As long as I can survive, I don't care whether you live or die. Besides, there is only one person on the other side. No matter what, he can't capture all of them at the same time, right? Suddenly, Das Bonus' ears moved and his expression became extremely ugly. We can't let the criminals escape. Everyone, attack! Yes. This sentence was not shouted by their people, but by someone else. As Ron watched calmly, as expected, the guys who had just entered the jungle screamed the next moment. The flashes of swords and sabers intertwined, the sound of gunfire continued, and the stench of blood and gunpowder quickly filled the air. This was a one-sided massacre. Facing the most elite team under Garp, let alone the less than 300 scumbags from Baroque works, they can handle it calmly even if it is an entire regular army of the kingdom. Soon, Tryon, covered in blood and with a sharp knife in his hand dripping with scarlet liquid, walked out of the jungle. At this time, the dark clouds just dissipated, and half of his body was covered in the moonlight, making him look like a demon. Seeing the other person's attire clearly, Das Bonus felt even more desolate. Navy. At the same time, Ron also floated down from the sky and stepped into the hell on earth that he created. Noticing the white rose on his chest, Das Bonus suddenly realized, so that's it. Fred betrayed us. Ron's outfit was the standard attire of the Flower City Guards, and the rose on his chest was a qualification only for the Queen's Guards. Now the Flower City Queen's Guards and the Navy have joined forces to appear here and cripple them. The purpose is obvious. They were betrayed. Not only did Fred not want to pay them, he also gave them as credit to the Navy. In Hwachu, there is only one person other than Fred who is capable of tracking them down. Asshole! At this moment, half of Galdino's hair was torn off by the hot wax, and large patches of red were all over his body. After seeing clearly who the enemy was, the ruthlessness in his bones as a killer burst out. Tryon drew his sword and stepped forward, charging towards the other side with a strong murderous aura. I advise you to be honest. If you dare to resist, I will kill you without mercy. I'm not afraid of you. The stinging pain from the burns made Galdino no longer calm. He raised his hands and countless wax gushed out, piling up on the ground. In the blink of an eye, a huge candle doll appeared in the center of the venue, about 10 meters tall. Are you desperate? Ron narrowed his eyes slightly, looking at Galdino, whose forehead was covered with cold sweat but without a trace of wax to protect him. Well, with Darth Bonus here, your existence has no meaning. Go to hell. Navy. Galdino roared, commanding the wax giant to stride forward and slash at the place where the Navy was the most concentrated. Bang! The wax giant held two long swords, which, with the help of the wax fruit, were not only as hard as iron, but also extremely sharp. In addition, with such a huge body and terrifying weight, the ground was shaking when the sword came down. However, the attacked soldiers did not panic. As the elite troops under Garp, they were accustomed to fighting against all kinds of powerful enemies. Almost at the moment when the great sword was chopped down, a group of people stepped on the Shave and Moon steps and dispersed from the spot. Humph! You are so stubborn. The wax giant would not cause any substantial damage to the soldiers, but because of its huge body, its attack range was extremely large, and the soldiers had no way to get close to it while ensuring safety. Those being chased could only flee. In response, Tryon snorted angrily and was about to draw his sword to chop him, but he saw a flash of lightning appear behind Galdino. That is the unique way of movement for the user of the Thunder Fruit, teleportation. Even the Tyrant Bear's teleportation by bouncing through the air cannot compare to this miracle, which is completely a miracle without any trace. Putting down the sword, Tryon remained calm and stared at the remaining Das Bonus. That's it. Just surrender. At the same time, accompanied by a piercing crackling noise, Ron held a ball of thunder in his hand and reached it upwards. Puff! Wow! The wax doll paused, and Galdino stared at the big hand that passed through his chest, his eyes wide open in disbelief. When will you? You guess. Wow! As Ron pulled his hand out of his chest, a large pool of blood and internal organs flowed out like a fountain, quickly dyeing the ground red. Until his death, Galdino did not notice when Ron came behind him. If you don't have the observation Haki or Luffy's combat instinct, you can't deal with the skill of teleportation. Boom! Without its master, the wax giant began to collapse, and soon became a piece of ordinary wax without any lethality. At this moment, Ron and Tryon locked their eyes on Darth Bonus, who took out sea stone handcuffs and began to approach. Those who resist will be killed without mercy. Kill! The soldiers' roars echoed through the mountains. The remaining members of the Baroque workshop looked ashen and dropped their weapons. This group of navy is so terrible. It can't be beaten at all. Chapter 50 Tryon's Hatred. In fact, apart from the famous pirates in the original work and the new world teeming with monsters, the navy has an absolute advantage in clearing out pirates most of the time. This is particularly evident in the first half of the Grand Line and the Four Seas. The combat effectiveness brought by strong ships, powerful guns, and high-quality firearms is far beyond the reach of ordinary people who can easily catch up with it through practice and strengthening. Even in the early days of the Straw Hat Pirates in the East China Sea, they were chased by the navy and were in chaos. If it weren't for the help of Nami, the genius navigator, they would have been captured countless times. What's even more different from the original is that although the navy has impelled down city and prisons in various places, when it comes to clearing out criminals, they will never focus on arresting them. If you meet a pirate, kill him first. Break the enemy's courage and kill all those who resist stubbornly. In this way, the remaining pirates will see the reality and give up resistance, which will become a military merit for the soldiers, and there will be no potential crisis. Moreover, those big pirates value their face more than their lives. The shame of being caught by the navy will make them unable to hold their heads up for the rest of their lives. They would rather die than surrender and would never beg for mercy. Faced with such a guy, it is naive to focus on capturing him. The navy's losses in 1 year are enough to make the five elders feel distressed. The battle plan formulated by Tryon was based on this logic, and it was also one of the common tactics used by the navy when facing large groups of enemies. First, let Ron use the coverage area and lethality of thunder to disrupt the enemy's defense line, and then they will rush in from all sides to kill the fleeing people. In the end, only the strongest and the least courageous are left, which is very easy to arrest. This plan, if applied to the sea, would first launch a round of saturation bombardment to scare the enemy to death, and then elite officers would lead the team to attack the enemy's main formation, while the rest of the people would provide cover and make detours, using seine nets to catch fish. Well, the above is limited to normal naval combat ideas. A tough hawkish leader like Akainu generally does not allow any survivors. When facing a large number of enemies, even if his soldiers would suffer heavy casualties, he would order them to rush forward like a tide, wipe out all the enemies, and never allow anyone to retreat. Don't kill me. I surrender. I surrender too, don't kill me. With a shout of kill, the ordinary members of the Baroque works surrendered and were tied up one by one under the guidance of the soldiers. During this process, Dasponis discovered that this was not a large naval force at all, but just a small team of no more than 30 people. But it was such a small team that launched a surprise attack without causing any casualties on the other side. Their combat capability was so terrifying that it was astonishing. Looking across the ocean, there is only one place where a naval squadron with such combat effectiveness can be found. Navy Headquarters. Dasponis is a sophisticated and calm person who never shows his emotions. He is the chief commander of Baroque works and the most trusted, or even the only, subordinate of Crocodile. He knows very well that his group of people may seem powerful, but they are far behind the monster that suppresses the sea, the Navy headquarters. It's not that he didn't think about escaping during the chaos, but after the guy dressed as a Hwaja guard appeared, his attention was always on him. After that, the speed and means of instantly killing Mr. 3 made him not have the slightest idea of escaping. That's thunder and lightning. Although it has disappeared for hundreds of years, in the Devil Fruit Encyclopedia, in the natural classification, the thunder fruit is still listed first. But it is even more impossible to make him surrender. He knew the reason why the Navy didn't kill him and killed Mr. 3. In addition to killing a chicken to scare the monkey, it was also because his status here was obvious. Catching him and torturing him to interrogate for intelligence was the result the Navy wanted. And the Navy has plenty of means to make him reveal all the information. In that case, either escape or die in battle. Clang! With a roar, the skin on Dasboni's body rose high. The skin, which was only a palm wide, quickly changed from flesh color to a metal-like material, with extremely sharp edges that were frightening. As expected, you are also a fruit ability user. Tryon noticed every change in Darth Bonus, and when he noticed the blades floating around him, he frowned slightly. If the candle man who obeyed the order before was not restrained by the high temperature of lightning, ordinary people would not be able to hurt the enemy behind the candle wall. As a black man who can command him, there is no doubt that this person is stronger. And this fruit ability looks a little familiar? Where have you seen him before? Tryon was thinking silently. That's right. I'm a blade man who ate the quick slash fruit. My whole body can turn into tough knives. Dasbonies explained briefly and adjusted his breath. You're a swordsman, right? Sorry. I've never been cut by a swordsman before. The next moment, he strode forward and attacked Tryon. Dust slash. Call out, call out, call out. This is a high-speed slashing move that uses two-handed blades as the casting element. It is called dust, which means to chop objects into dust. Its power should not be underestimated. The overwhelming fish scale-like knife light swept down, and a person-high ruined stone slab suddenly had a series of dense cracks, and then it silently split and decomposed into thumb-sized stones. The first move he made was a powerful trick. Dasbonies wanted to catch Tryon off guard and end the battle quickly. At the same time, he focused part of his attention on Roan to prevent himself from being attacked. The quick slash fruit can make the body of the ability user as hard as steel. The swordsman's slash is not worth mentioning in front of it, which is also the root of his underestimation of the swordsman. Only Roan's terrible thunder attack is something that Dasbonies dare not be careless about. But why is he laughing? Ron had no intention of attacking, and he even had no interest in paying attention to the confrontation. When Dasbonies rushed towards Tryon desperately, Ron simply turned around and walked towards the prisoners. There were a few guys over there who were not very obedient, handcuffed and swearing at the soldiers, so he just killed them to make an example of them. At this moment, Tryon's calm but angry voice rang in Dasbonus's ears. You still look down on swordsmen. Dasbonus, the bounty hunter from the West Sea more than a decade ago. Nanny. Dasbonies turned his head back in an instant, and all he saw was a crescent-shaped blade flash across his retina. Then, ding, bang. The next second, a huge force came from above, chopping his hands that had turned into blades, cutting off the dust. Persia Bonus was not worried that the opponent could break his dust slash. It's not that no one has broken his attack in the past, but the swordsman's sword can't cut through the blade transformed by his fruit ability, let alone hurt his body that is as hard as steel. And he can take this opportunity to leisurely grab the opponent's weapon and stab the knife into the opponent's heart. So he was surprised that the other party actually called out his name. Who are you? I used to be a lieutenant of the 296th branch of the West Sea, just an unknown person. Tryon sneered, increased the strength of his arm, and slashed downwards. Laugh. In an instant, the terrifying sword intent and great strength were all poured into the blade, like a hot knife cutting into butter, without any pause, cutting off the blade of the arm transformed by the fruit power. At the same time, the momentum continued to move downwards, crushing everything in its path, and slashed across his chest. Dasponis only felt a chill in his arms and chest, and then a piercing pain enveloped him. What? Looking at Dasponis, who was screaming and wailing while holding his broken arm, Tryon's expression was very complicated. Although I already knew that you are no match for me, I still want to say that you really disappoint me, killer. Bang! After kicking Dasponis in the head and watching him tumble into the large pit dug in the center of the camp, Tryon was silent for a moment and then waved his hand, put sea stone handcuffs on him and take him back. Yes. Faced with a leader who was in a very bad mood, the soldiers looked at each other in confusion and ran over to catch the man. In response, Ron released his hands from the two human-shaped charcoal balls and shook his head as the captives looked at the devil. I see. Is this the source of your chest scar? Psycho Tryon, born in the West Sea, was originally an ordinary lieutenant. He was seriously injured and dying during a mission, and then he was saved by Garp, who passed by and followed him all the way to the Grand Line. Tryon has a terrible scar on his chest, just like Zorro, from the shoulder blade to the abdomen. It is said that it was cut by someone, but he does not regard it as an honor, but as a shame. He dresses neatly all day, and even does not take off his close-fitting white shirt when exercising, in order to cover this scar. But who is the culprit, Ron has never known. But now he understands. I'm afraid Darth Bonus would never have thought that the lieutenant who was almost killed by him would grow to this point. Hatred is indeed the source of human progress. The fast-slashing man Darth Bonus was proud of his iron defense. He rarely encountered opponents in the Grand Line and the West Sea, so he became tired of practicing. But in fact, that was just the normal defense level of the Navy elite after learning the iron block. At most, he had the advantages of mobility, fast attack, and low physical consumption. What qualifications did he have to look down on the swordsman in the world? You know, although Tryon is only a major general, he is Garp's adjutant. Over the past decade, he has fought in many battles and carried out several missions in the New World. Even a strong man who has learned armament haki would not dare to take on his restrained sword move. The root of Dasponis' arrogance is ignorance, or rather, his definition of powerful is not very clear, just like Ron before. Chapter 51 Miss Golden Week. Soon, there was no one left in the camp to resist. After the fast cutters were defeated by the swordsmen and several dishonest captives were killed by thunder, the remaining salted fish were not a concern. Tryon, who was in a bad mood, arranged for his men to count the damage and results of the battle. After thinking for a while, a soldier walked up to Ron, saluted and said, "Mr. Ron, we found a little girl in the big pit. She should be a resident of Hwaju. They should be residents of the Flower City." With Ron, the chief guard of the Flower City Palace, there was no need to bother Tryon with such trivial matters. Not to mention that the latter was in a bad mood right now. Ron didn't care and waved his hand, "Take them back together, and then ask anyone who has a lost child to come and claim them. Understand?" After the soldiers walked away, Ron paused for 3 seconds and then appeared in front of him via teleportation. "Wait! You mean little girl? What does she look like?" The soldier was startled. It was not a good experience to see a figure suddenly appear in front of him. He almost drew his sword to attack. However, he immediately recognized Ron in a unique uniform. He breathed a sigh of relief and replied, "It's just an ordinary little girl with a drawing board. It is said that she was caught by them when she came out to draw." "An ordinary little girl? No, that's Miss Golden Week, a senior executive of Baroque Works who can partner with Mr. 3. Ron looked at him speechlessly, then said, "Be careful. She is also a member of the Baroque Workshop. Confiscate her drawing board and take her back for questioning." Soldier. A little girl is also a member of the Baroque Workshop, you must be kidding. Wait, it is very possible. In such a deep mountain forest, would there be a little girl coming here to collect folk songs? Then he was caught by the Baroque works, where he was provided with good food and drink and was not abused. Could this be such a coincidence? That being said, it is indeed very suspicious. The soldier was immediately shocked and said, "Yes." At this time, Tryon came over and asked, "What happened, Ron?" "Major General Tryon. Such and such, such and such." After hearing the explanation, Tryon looked suspicious. "You're not mistaken, are you? The guys at Baroque Workshop are all extremely vicious. How could they possibly accept a little girl? Look at Darth Bonus, the famous bounty hunter in the West Sea, nicknamed the Murderous Killer, which is completely different in style." But what Tryon didn't know was that there was something called flag in the world. After he questioned it, before Ron could explain, a sound of swords clashing was heard. At the same time, some soldiers were shouting, "Are you crazy, White? I'm Kate. Be careful. Let's subdue him together." Tryon and Ron looked back and saw that the soldier who had just reported the news was raising his sword and slashing at his companions. Because he was not prepared and the distance was too close, the soldier named Kate was immediately slashed. Fortunately, the elite soldiers present were not ordinary people, and the injury was not serious. Kate quickly distanced herself, and then the others took out their blades and fought with the opponent. At the same time, a small figure carrying a drawing board was quietly running into the depths of the jungle. In response, Ron raised an eyebrow at Tryon. "What do you think the chances are that a soldier will betray you?" Tryon's face darkened. "Shut up. You go arrest them, I'll stop them." Then he drew out his sharp sword and rushed forward. Yes, yes. There was a flash of lightning, and Ron disappeared from the spot. "Soldier, do you know what you are doing?" Tryon did not attack and subdue White immediately. As Ron said, how likely is it that a soldier will betray? Or is it the eve of rewarding meritorious service after a great victory? So it is very likely that the little girl did something to control him. Such an incredible thing. The first suspect of Tryon is the Devil Fruit ability user. He needs to collect intelligence and improve the information on the Devil Fruit. Anyway, the controlled ones are just ordinary soldiers with limited combat power, so Tryon is not in a hurry at all. "I'm so sorry, sir. But I can't help myself." The soldier named White was still conscious, but he said, "I don't know why, but I suddenly feel that it is fun to betray my brothers, especially Kate. He is my eldest brother, and it makes more sense to betray him." Kate was almost choked by the knife and had a cerebral hemorrhage. She stood up and wanted to kill the man. Fortunately, she was stopped by the soldiers. Tryon's eyelids twitched when he heard this, but he also breathed a sigh of relief. It sounds like a person's emotions are infinitely magnified, causing the body to lose control. It's not like a certain Shishibukai who used silk threads to control the soldiers' bodies. In that case, just knock him out. Thinking of this, Tryon no longer held back. When the opponent chopped down, he dodged and moved behind him, raising the hilt of the knife. With a doon sound, the world became quiet. Then Tryon looked around and saw Ron standing by with an unconscious little girl. With his speed, it was no big deal to catch the Golden Week girl. When Tryon looked over, he pointed to a pile of black smoke on the ground, which looked like a drawing board and a paintbrush. It must be the paint on his back that affected his mood. "Just now, this little girl wanted to paint me, but I burned it off." Seeing Tryon looking over, Ron pointed to a large stain of paint on the back of the soldier's shirt. It was a dark mass of paint, and Tryon would not have noticed it if he hadn't been reminded in this dark place. "I see. Paint." Tryon thought for a moment and slashed with his knife. With a crisp sound, the piece of clothing with paint on it was cut off and thrown aside. Then Tryon ordered, "Wake him up and see what's going on. Don't move, let me do it." Kate, who had simply bandaged her wound, walked towards her brother with a sneer under the gaze of a group of people. Soon, a scream was heard. "Ah! Who hit me? Ouch! Brother, be gentle, I didn't mean it. I really didn't mean it. I'm very normal now." "Ah! Where are you hitting me? If you hit me again, I'll fight back. Help, help, sir." Watching the two brothers loving each other, Tryon breathed a sigh of relief. But he suddenly shuddered and asked, "You mean, she wanted to paint you just now?" As soon as these words were spoken, the whole jungle became quiet in an instant. Judging from the fact that this soldier was willing to kill even his own brother, if the person being controlled was Ron. Hiss! Everyone was shocked, and Tryon roared, "Who had the lowest Deo power in the last test? Come here and keep an eye on her." After a while of chaos, a short soldier with a red face was assigned the important responsibility of guarding Golden Week. No one expected that the person who brought the most trouble to everyone in this mission was not Mr. 1 who claimed that he had never been hurt by a swordsman, nor was it Mr. 3 who created a wax giant to chase the soldiers everywhere, but rather a little girl named Golden Week who had little fighting power but could control people's emotions. Just imagine, what if the people being controlled were Ron and Tryon? She can even wipe out this elite Navy team. Seeing that Golden Week was definitely locked in the cage, Tryon breathed a sigh of relief. "Come with me, Ron." Chapter 52, Chaos in Hwaju, I. The camp was built around a pit, which was filled with various digging tools and mine carts for transporting mud and sand. Judging from the fierce resistance just now, the Baroque works relied entirely on its own people to dig, and did not even capture a single slave. Then the problem is coming. What on earth are they digging for? Standing in the center of the pit, Tryon scooped up a handful of dirt with his scabbard and watched it blown away by the night wind. Who knows? You might as well ask that little girl about this question. Or wait until that guy wakes up and interrogate him. Ron answered casually, but he already had a guess in his mind. What was originally just a possibility of suspicion has now slowly become an established fact. First, more than one people worked together to dig a pit, and the supervisor was Mr. whom Crocodile trusted the most. Secondly, there are no mineral veins here, and what they are digging is not minerals, which can be seen from the fact that they are not carrying any items for transportation. Finally, although Crocodile was short of money, could they transport the treasure dug out from Hwaju thousands of miles away without Fred's knowledge? If they could do that, Fred would have no face to rebel. So there must be some important item that is easy to carry buried here, and Crocodile wants to get it. The arrival of the Navy made Crocodile realize that nothing could be done. He had to either give up evacuating personnel immediately or create interference in other ways to prevent the famous Iron Fist Garp from taking action. He chose the latter and had Von Clay play Cobra and put on a good show in front of the 5 elders. If nothing unexpected happens, this is the truth. And most importantly, the historical text meets all the above requirements. First, it is important, and needs to be supervised by the most trusted subordinates. Besides being trustworthy, it is also convenient for killing people to silence them. Second, the quantity is small, and it does not need a lot of manpower to carry it out. If Fred finds out, it will only cause trouble. Third, it is easy to carry. The historical text is indeed huge, and each piece weighs more than 10 tons, but if you only take out a piece of rubbing paper, what does it matter? If they continued digging, they would most likely find an answer, but that answer would be something they could not afford. The importance that the world government places on historical texts is well known to everyone. If you think about the time, it has only been 15 years since the archaeological Holy Land of O'Hara was destroyed by the Demon Slayer Order. A generation of people has a deep memory of it. Even in the Navy headquarters, not everyone is qualified to access historical texts. So Ron didn't want to get involved in this mess. Even if he wanted to dig it out, it couldn't be done by him and Tryon. The old bastard is the most suitable candidate. Perhaps this is what he did in the original work, which directly disrupted Crocodile's plan and forced him to continue planning Alabasta. Tryon didn't know what Ron was thinking. He thought for a moment and nodded. That's right. This is the Flower City. No matter what treasures we dig out, they won't belong to the Navy. Just ask what they are. Then he stood up and returned to the ground with Ron. Looking at the soldiers with joy on their faces, Tryon smiled and said, "Let's go." Yes. The Baroque works has always been secretive, and no one knows where they are. But it can be expected that Das Bonus must be a member of a high status among them, after all. Sorry. I've never been injured by a swordsman before. This battle not only uncovered the conspiracy of the Baroque works, but also captured all the criminals including the senior cadre Das Bonus. Even if the military merits were shared, the soldiers would get a considerable improvement. So excitement is natural. The only problem now is Hwaju. Thinking of this, Ron raised his eyebrows and looked at the tall snow-capped mountain where the palace was located, and said to himself, "Calculate the time, is it about time?" The Flower City and the Queen's Palace. A servant ran to the outside of the palace and knelt down. "Your Majesty, General Fred requests to see you. Tomorrow is the Queen's birthday banquet, which is also the time when Fred will succeed to the throne in the eyes of many insiders." One can imagine what Fred is thinking when he comes to see the Queen now. He couldn't be sure if there would be an accident tomorrow like today, so he decided to confront Rosa tonight. Sometimes, no matter how big the problem is, as long as you make it clear, the difficulty will become very low. Fred thought so before entering the bedroom, but after entering the bedroom, Fred found that things had changed. He took the broad door-panel giant sword from his back and held it in his hand. Looking at the three familiar faces in front of him, Fred's face was darker than his black heavy armor. The Queen, Garp, and General Jade. In front of him, besides the old bastard Garp who was willing to sacrifice his life and disregard discipline to protect the Queen's safety, there was also a person he had never expected. That was the former head of the guards of Hwaju and the Queen's true confidant, Jade. "You didn't expect I wasn't dead, did you?" Jade looked to be around 50 years old, taller and stronger than Garp. He was nearly 3 meters tall, with blonde hair and a sallow complexion. Even when sitting on a chair, he was more than twice as tall as the other two. Glancing at Fred, who was holding the sword tightly and looking nervous, Jed's eyes were full of disdain. "You want to be a king with such little bearing? Bah! Asshole!" Fred's face flushed red in an instant, and he gnashed his teeth, wishing he could kill him with a knife, but he didn't dare to do that. First of all, Jed was his swordsmanship teacher, who had taught him swordsmanship since he was a child. The strict education still had an impact on Fred's heart. Secondly, sitting next to him was Garp, a monster who swept across the New World and defeated rocks when he was young. Even Whitebeard and Pirate King Roger didn't dare to touch his tiger whiskers easily. Looking at the lineup in front of him, Fred knew that if he took action, he would surely die. Okay Jed, he is a member of the royal family after all. Rosa was dressed neatly tonight, sitting in the smallest seat, but with the strongest aura. She stopped Jed lightly, and then said to Fred, "Do you know what you did wrong, Fred?" "Okay." When asked by Rosa, Fred frowned slightly. He thought the Queen had brought out this lineup to call for punishment. After all, treason was something that didn't make sense anywhere. But Rosa's tone now didn't sound like she was calling for punishment, but rather like an elder teaching a younger generation. Fred glanced at the three people sitting in the seats. The Queen's attitude had already made it clear that Jed's opinion could be ignored, but why was even Cap so calm and acquiesced to this attitude? Could it be? Fred sneered and said, "Are you still pretending to be noble today? You should know my character, Aunt. Even if I die, I will not admit defeat. Even if you know you've done something wrong." The wrinkles on Rosa's face gradually accumulated, and gradually evolved into uncontrollable anger while trembling. She waved her hand and shouted angrily, "General Jade, Lieutenant General Garp, please teach him a lesson for me. Clear. The two men immediately stood up with grim smiles, and thick smoke and sparks came out of Fred's body opposite him. If you knew you were going to fight, why did you have to pretend? Swish! Fred thrust the door panel sword forward and shouted, taking the initiative. Die! Chapter 53, Chaos in the Flower City. The problem Ron mentioned was not Fred, but the Allied Nations alliance. In fact, after knowing Rosa's series of arrangements, he directly labeled Fred as an idiot. It's not that his side is not strong enough, but that the enemy has evil plans. However, plans cannot keep up with changes. Originally, he was supposed to appear in the Queen's bedroom tonight, and Jed should continue to hide. After Fred appeared, with his internal and external support, Rosa would go with the flow and give up the throne. As a result, the old bastard Garp ignored discipline and insisted on protecting the Queen's safety, and asked him to follow him to clear out the Baroque works, which brought an uncontrollable variable to the plan. I wonder how the Queen will deal with the old bastard's sudden impulse. If we don't accuse the member states of murdering the Queen, the crisis cannot be resolved. Walking at the front of the team, Ron whispered to himself. Fred is a genius, but even the Queen cannot ignore the pressure from the alliance, and has to pretend to be coerced into abdicating. If Fred succeeds to the throne under such circumstances, how should he deal with them? Even if Fred continues to abandon his talents, how much blood and flesh will those alliances eat from the Flower City during this period? Rosa can give the throne to Fred, but she will never allow her people to be betrayed. So how to deal with those greedy hyenas is the real problem. At this point, it was clear that Fred, Ron, Garp, including the Navy headquarters, the world government, and Baroque works, were all being manipulated by the Queen. Civil unrest in the palace? No, this is just a test given to Fred by the Queen. A test to see if he has the courage to support a kingdom. Ultimately, the problem is that the Queen has no children. Without an heir, it was only a matter of time before the throne would be passed to Fred, the only one with the legal right of succession. But Fred's sudden rebellion caught Queen Rosa off guard. After seeing her nephew's desire for the throne, Rosa simply took advantage of the situation and ordered Jed to fake his own death and escape, hiding in the dark. Then, fearing that her diehard followers would rather die than surrender, she gave the position of the chief of the palace guard to Ron until now, secretly entrusting him to help Fred. If everything goes according to the original plan, with the help of Ron, the mission impossible, Fred will smoothly succeed to the throne tomorrow and the Queen will step down. 3 days later, the Queen disappeared, and the secret agents began to spread rumors that Fred had killed the previous king and sold out the interests of the people in exchange for support, making the Allied countries suspicious of each other. After all, they need to stand on the same front with Fred in order to suck blood from the fat meat of the Flower City. If Fred falls, who will be the final beneficiary? When the situation develops to the point where a rebellion is about to break out, of course this is also the Queen's backup plan. The Queen, who has recovered from her injuries, will stand up and produce evidence to prove that Fred was not involved in her murder. Of course the evidence is also forged, and point out that the entire matter was planned by the accomplices of the Allied countries. By then, if Fred wanted to keep his throne, his only way out would be to break off the alliance with tears, laughs, in front of his aunt who supported his innocence. If any member of the Allied powers refuses to obey, Hwaju is not afraid of war. At the same time, a war can also make the people and soldiers completely united and accept Fred's rule. In addition, the Queen clearly supports Fred and the Allied powers have a legitimate reason to murder the Queen. The Allied powers will not get any benefits, but will get into trouble. Finally, with the Navy's annihilation of Baroque works tonight, all internal and external troubles in Flower City have been resolved, and Fred's royal power has been stabilized. At this point, Rosa's goal has been achieved. When Ron learned Queen Rosa's complete plan, he was stunned for 3 minutes. These tacticians are so terrifying. Of course, this is the most perfect plan, and there will definitely be some uncontrollable variables along the way. For example, now, I, the captain of the guard who should have been guarding the palace, am now escorting a group of prisoners in the wilderness, while Garp, who is supposed to be escorting these prisoners, is in the palace protecting the queen. If he didn't show up, Fred wouldn't believe that Rosa would give in so easily. If he made things clear, future plans might also change. Ron didn't know what the solution was, but Rosa definitely had one. Bang! Black coal smoke started a fire in the palace. The guards were in a panic. Some wanted to ensure the queen's safety, while others thought that the focus should be on putting out the fire, and they kept arguing. Fred's confidants planted in the palace were also confused at this moment. Judging from the current situation, their boss was exposed? So what should we do? Should he follow the guards to put out the fire and protect the emperor, or should he just go all out and completely transform the palace? I didn't even leave a message in advance. At this moment, a figure flew from a distance, smashed the wall and fell to the ground. These criminals looked at him blankly, and then turned their gaze to the tall and strong man outside the hole who was holding a door panel and a big sword. General Jade. The crowd was stunned as if they had seen a ghost. Many of them had seen with their own eyes the center of the storm where Jed was beaten into by Mr. One. Judging from the horrible climate of the Grand Line, Jed should have drowned long ago. Why is it here? Fred also wanted to know this question, but now was not the time. What are you still standing there for? Stop him. Yes, I understand. The boss's appearance had definitely exposed him. These people dared to follow Fred in rebellion, and they were all very ruthless. Now that the enemy relationship was clear, they all drew their weapons and rushed towards Jed. Ha ha ha. Are these also your subordinates? Jade, just leave them to me. Before they could rush out, a figure suddenly appeared in the middle of the room. Fred's pupil shrank, and without thinking, he smashed the wall and fled in a hurry. The hearty laughter attracted the attention of the crowd. When they looked back, several of them immediately fell to the ground. Navy hero, Iron Fist Garp. Yes, it's me. Garp opened his mouth wide and waved his big hand forward like a palm leaf fan. There was no unnecessary movement. After the strong wind passed, the group of rebels stared at their empty palms in a daze. Where's my weapon? Here we are, little ones. Garp, who was holding a large bundle of miscellaneous weapons in his arms, smiled when he heard the words and threw the weapons out. Suddenly, an overwhelming storm of steel rushed straight towards the crowd, and the latter opened their eyes in fear and were hit in the panic. Dong dong! Laugh! After a series of collisions, the only ones standing in the room were Garp and Jade, who had just approached. This kid ran away pretty fast. But, he's too naive. Looking at the direction where Fred fled, Jed raised his sword, which was as wide as a door panel. His movement of raising the sword was not fast, but at the moment of drawing the sword, a terrifying tornado of air was blown out, blowing the solid stone palace away. Fishman karate wind-stepping style stone tornado. Boom! Tons of boulders were flying all over the sky, swept by the air currents, forming a long dragon, rushing straight towards Fred in the distance. Feeling the danger coming from behind him, Fred gritted his teeth secretly and put his hands together. Soot explosion! Bang! Hiss! A ball of sparks burst out from his hands, and the thick smoke and dust quickly ignited and burned. The next moment. Boom! Boom! The power of the dust explosion was enough to split mountains and rocks, not to mention that this was coal dust created by Fred's fruit ability. The stone tornado had just entered the coal smoke area when it was directly shattered by the explosion. The broken stones that lost the stirring of the airflow fell from the sky and made a pit on the ground. But even though he had broken Jed's killer move, Fred was not happy. He was too close, and the impact of the coal dust explosion threw him out heavily, and he fell to the ground with his bones screaming. Damn it! Jade, is actually a fishman. No wonder he didn't drown when he fell into the center of the storm, no wonder he was able to return to Hwaju after blocking the port himself. It turns out he is a fishman. After nearly 30 years of growing up, Fred finally learned this secret for the first time. No, we must escape. Besides Jed, there was also Cap who was chasing him. He was much more terrifying than Jed. The reason why Fred didn't dare to stop was because of Cap. He tried to stand up and looked ahead. If I remember correctly, if I leave the palace from this direction, I will reach the embassy where the nobles of the allied countries live. Once there, Garp would never dare to attack in front of a large number of nobles of the allied countries, but if it was just Jed, Fred would not necessarily lose. Boom! With one punch, he smashed the shield of the rebel in front of him, and smashed it into the ruins until it turned into a pool of meat paste. Cap looked in the direction where Fred slipped away and said to Jed. Jed, the Queen wants me to clean up the rebels in the palace. Can I leave Fred to you? Humph. Boring question. Jed lifted his heavy sword, which was as white as a door panel, with a look of disdain on his face. Then, he stomped his right foot downwards, and soared into the sky at a speed as fast as flying. When a giant weighing over a ton made such a move, the gusts of wind whistled in all directions, making it difficult for people to stand steadily. The secret of fishman karate: treading on the wind style treading on the wind. Jed flew over the palace with a moonstep-like pace. On the ground, Garp stroked his beard, confused. I always feel like Jed has some weird grudge against me. When did I provoke him? Kill. Kill Garp. He is a Marine, and we are a member of the world government. Don't be afraid. He doesn't dare to kill anyone. At this time, a shout attracted Garp's attention. Looking at the royal soldiers surrounding him, Garp burst into a circle of visible black flames, and his whole body was filled with murderous aura. Don't dare. You can try it. After that, Garp waved his fists and rushed into the flock like a tiger. If it were other people in the navy, they would not dare to take action against the member states at will, but if it were that old bastard Garp, is there anything he can't do? Not to mention that it is difficult for men to remain rational in front of the women they love, and this is true for everyone, young or old. Ambassador Manor, 3rd floor. How is His Highness Andrew? An old nobleman in a slim black robe sat at the head seat and asked the servant who was closing the door. Your Excellency, his life is no longer in danger, but his injuries are too severe and the doctor is not sure when he will wake up. Humph. It doesn't matter whether that loser dies or not. A sturdy man pursed his lips in disdain and said, Count Gino, why do you think the Queen suddenly appointed that brat from the navy as the chief of the palace guards? Andrew's life and death are not worth mentioning to them. He is just a prince of a small country. The focus now is Rosa's attitude. Facing so many people concentrating on exerting pressure, can Rosa still turn the tables? Joke. Even tigers are afraid of wolves. The threat they can create together is so great that even the tiger of Hwaju cannot withstand it, so Fred's promotion to the top is a foregone conclusion. The old man named Gino was in no hurry to speak, although he also did not understand the Queen's decision. When Fred came to power in the future, that Navy kid would definitely be eliminated. These people knew the tricks under the royal power better than each other. However, Gino did not dare to take Rosa lightly. She was a ruthless person who could seize power in the royal war with her daughter. To say that she had no hidden purpose was simply humiliating the royal bloodline that died decades ago. Could it be that Hwaju has connected with the world government? This was the only possibility Gino could think of. Although the world government was not allowed to interfere in the political struggles of the member states, since they were under the rule of the world government, everyone had to give face to the 5 elders. Moreover, he had heard about Cobra's joint petition. The fact that the 5 elders did not directly ask the Navy to withdraw was already a subtle expression of their attitude. The lightning stimulation device was of great importance. Apart from the 5 elders and related researchers, only the top brass of the Navy headquarters and the CP organization knew about the transaction. So from an uninformed perspective, Gino became more and more frightened the more he thought about it. Things may have changed. Gino looked up at this group of nobles who were united by interests and frowned silently. If things really develop to that point, this group of rubbish alone will not be enough to shake Hwachu. And so, Sir Andre, you must immediately arrange for someone to contact Fred and tell him that we will help him inherit the throne at any cost. Now that Rosa's attitude has changed, we must unite to completely overthrow Rosa and get a share of the spoils. For the nobles, all the great principles are meaningless. Only thoroughgoing interests can enable them to make rational judgments. If Rosa doesn't fall, then everything will be in vain, and their previous efforts will be wasted. When they return to their country in the future, the conflicts of interest among the nobles will give them a hard time. The strong man Andre knew this, and a hint of cruelty flashed in his eyes. I know. If things really develop out of control, they are capable of assassination or poisoning. At this moment, an explosion woke everyone up. When everyone looked back, they saw smoke and dust billowing from the palace under the night sky, and a fire dragon rising into the sky. What happened? That's the palace. The palace is on fire. This is terrible. There are fires everywhere in the palace. The guards there are of no use at all. What? Send someone to put out the fire quickly. Rosa can't be in any danger now. They had just decided on the strategy and hadn't even had time to start the action. Why did the palace explode? Even if they wanted to kill Rosa, they had to make all the preparations and carefully plan with Fred before they could act. Gino still sat in his seat, watching the guards running towards the palace. Suddenly, he frowned and thought of a possibility. He quickly stopped them and said, "No. Tell everyone to come back. Do not approach the palace without my order." Okay. Noticing the puzzled looks on the nobles' faces, Gino's eyebrows twitched. He ignored the noble etiquette and shouted with a red face, "Hurry up! This is a trap!" What? Oh my God! That's what it is! The nobles came to their senses. If their people showed up in the palace, it would be a perfect excuse for the queen to attack them. As long as the queen insisted that they were the culprits, and killed a few people and pointed at them, it would be like falling into a pile of mud, and it would be shit. After realizing this, everyone took a deep breath. What a ruthless means! She is worthy of being the famous Queen of 1,000 Faces, Rosa. This fire was deliberately set for them to see. Damn you, Rosa! Andre, who was in a rage, tore off his bow tie and yelled viciously, "Useless! What are you still standing there for? Call him back immediately!" A few minutes later, all the personnel returned to the ambassador's manor, and the nobles expressed their gratitude to Gino. If he had not seen through the queen's sinister intentions and ordered the personnel to be recalled in time, most of them would have been labeled as assassins by Rosa. By then, not to mention Fred, the world government would not be able to protect them, and there would be no deal. Fred was eager to take the opportunity to kill a few people to maintain the situation. Moreover, these so-called allies will never help in times of need, but will only add insult to injury. There are only so many benefits. If you die, everyone will get more. Count Gino also breathed a sigh of relief and said, "Everyone stay alert tonight. Even if the whole king is in chaos, don't take any action." I understand. However, at this time, the nobles who were anxious to mobilize personnel did not notice that a group of guys disguised as guards were taking advantage of the chaos to leave some kind of mysterious powder everywhere in the ambassador's manor. After arranging the guard duty tonight, Gino was about to go back to his room to rest, when suddenly a figure broke through the wall and rolled into the garden. The group of people who had just breathed a sigh of relief had dark faces and couldn't help but secretly curse Rosa for her endless talk, but when they saw who that person was, they were so surprised that their eyes popped out. "General Fred, what's wrong with you?" Cough, cough, cough. Fred spat out the blood in his mouth, looked up at the nobles around him, and licked his lips. At this point, Garp didn't dare to take action. The only one left was his swordsmanship teacher, Jed. So he pretended to be anxious and said quickly, "Something is wrong. Rosa is desperate and wants to take the initiative. She wants Captain Jade, who has faked his death and returned, and Vice Admiral Garp of the Navy to kill me together. Help me stop them." "Nanny! Is Rosa crazy?" The nobles were all surprised. If Fred died, who would take over her throne in the future? Without a royal bloodline to inherit the throne, the Flower City would surely fall apart. The heroes from all walks of life shouted, "Are there any kings, princes, generals, or ministers of different races?" And each ruled his own kingdom and became the king of the mountain. The Queen of 1,000 Faces wants to use the future of Flower City to tell them that she would rather die than surrender. This crazy bitch! Gino was angry but also relieved. Since Rosa had given up, it meant that even if she promised the 5 elders some benefits, it would not be enough to make them stand on her side. In this way, they would not have to be so timid. Of course, the most urgent task now is to stop the pursuers. A broken Hwaju is easier to cooperate with than a Hwaju taken over by Fred. The former can only be regarded as drinking soup, while the latter is eating meat. Everyone, Navy Garp and Jade, are so audacious that they are trying to rebel. As allies of Flower City, we have an obligation to protect Fred and the future of Flower City. Gino stood on a high place to encourage them, speaking high-sounding words at will. The nobles rolled their eyes and immediately made faces that they had no choice but to do their duty, protect Fred. Protect Hwaju. Ha 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 ha. I want to kill him, can you stop me? Suddenly, a wild and overbearing laugh was heard. The guards' shouts and curses were heard outside the door, and soon, with a bang, the door flew in. Jade had already put on his own black heavy armor, with a broadsword as wide as a door on his shoulder, and grabbed a guard's neck with one hand, like he was pinching a chicken. With a casual throw, the guard flew out of the wall and disappeared with a plop. Big, bold. One noble was so angry that his mouth was trembling. He stood up and shouted, "You warrior, do you know who we are? Who gave you the courage to act wild here?" "Well, this." Jed put down his sword and touched the back of his head. Just when the noble thought that Jed was scared away by his threat, the latter suddenly grinned and said, "You don't know who you are, go back and ask your mother. It's none of my business. I'm not your father. You." The nobleman was so angry that he felt a lump of blood in his chest. Although they were good at plotting and making indirect accusations and malicious fabrications, if they really spoke like ordinary people and swore, a beggar would be far better than them. Jed laughed strangely, and swung the 100-kilogram door-plate sword as if swinging his arm. He gently slapped it downwards, and suddenly, a gust of wind burst out. Looking at the direction of the gust of wind, it was heading towards the crowd of nobles. Damn it! Fred was no longer careless. Although these people were not important to him, they were crucial to his throne. If they were all killed here, not to mention whether he could continue to succeed to the throne, the pressure from the allied countries behind the nobles would make him despair. Without saying a word, Fred leaped forward, his feet moving steadily, his body slightly crouched, and inserted the broadsword, which was as wide as a door panel, diagonally into the mud to block in front of his body. Bang! The next moment, the wind tornado hit the sword, exploding into countless wind blades that scattered and plowed the grass into pieces. Fred groaned and stood still like a mountain. Gino and the others who were blocked behind Fred were not seriously injured, but the ordinary soldiers gathered around them immediately fell to the ground wailing. The sharpness of the phoenix blade left them covered with wounds. They could not die even if they wanted to. They could only watch their limbs being severed and let out desperate wails. Thump! Putting the sword back on his shoulder, Jed grinned. "This move, unmovable as a mountain, is quite useful, but I taught you all your swordsmanship, do you think I'd be that stupid? This move is called wind stepping flow, swift wind vortex, and it's specifically used to kill enemies on a large scale. Hateful. Fred gritted his teeth, and streaks of powdery black smoke emerged from his shoulders, quickly wrapping around Jed like tentacles. Sparks kept flashing in the flying black smoke, reminiscent of a gunpowder explosion. The coal fruit. Jed did not dare to underestimate this ability. He stepped on the ground with his right foot and swung the sword upward with his backhand. Fishman karate wind-stepping style mud tornado. Suddenly, the soil under their feet that was cut and plowed by the wind blades was caught up in the airflow, spinning at high speed and gathering into a long mud dragon several meters thick. The soldiers who did not have time to leave the battlefield were drawn into it one after another, and in the constant collisions, they became nutrients for the mud dragon, and their corpses dyed it red. Step on the wind-style 100 rifts roaring bullet. The tornado alone was not enough to stop the soot black dragon. The real power of that thing was the explosion that followed. The reason why devil fruits were demonized was because they completely violated common sense and created miracles in the impossible. Jade believed that his fish skin could not stop the explosion, so he pulled down the raised sword and slashed the red mud dragon in front of him. Call out! Call out! Call out! The external airflow instantly interrupted the rotation of the mud dragon, turning it into countless red bullets wrapped in strong wines, and hit it hard forward. Sure enough, I can't get close to him. Fred frowned and snapped his fingers at the mud ball that was coming like a cannonball. Hiss! Bang! Boom! Long dragons of coal smoke were immediately ignited, with a sound as loud as thunder. The entire Hwaja fell into silence for a moment, and the dazzling flames were fanned by the strong wind. The fire took advantage of the wind and cast a raging hurricane of flames that spread 100 meters in the night. When Gino and the others saw this scene, they didn't dare to think too much and quickly led them to escape into the open space in the backyard of the ambassador's manor. In this world where the strong are respected, you can despise your opponent tactically, but you must never ignore the difference in strength between the two sides. In this world, you can use conspiracy and trickery to destroy the other party's family, and the other party can also use absolute force to kill your entire family. Obviously, Jed and Fred are the latter. They may not have the same political sense as these old nobles, but their strength is extraordinary. In the front yard, Fred had just taken a breath when Jed came charging at him with a big sword. He had no choice but to raise his sword to block and fight with him. This is why I won't teach you the wind-step fishman karate, Fred. While Jade was hacking and slashing, he pointed at the ordinary people around him who were wailing and screaming in the fire tornado. Your fruit ability combined with the wind-stepping style is too uncontrollable. Haha. Just to be frank, don't be so hypocritical, Teacher Jade. Fred remained unmoved, using his fruit ability and swordsmanship to continue engaging. Suddenly, he sneered, found the right opportunity, and punched Jade's sword. ZZ. Noticing sparks appearing where his fists collided, Jed cursed inwardly and pulled back. Then, a strong explosion came from his sword, which made his arm numb and almost dropped the sword. Waiting to rush out of the explosion range, Jed's long hair, like a madman, was burnt and curled by the flames, and his waxy yellow skin was now even yellower. This is smoked, please refer to the principle of smoking meat. Ahem, interesting. Spitting out a mouthful of blood and phlegm, Jed took a half step back and suddenly punched out as well. Fishman karate, 5,000 tiles punch. Nanny. Fred, who had just attacked with a sword, did not expect Jed to use this move. He was caught off guard and could only use his shoulder armor to block the fist. Then he felt a piercing pain and the shoulder of the jet-black heavy armor made of precious metal cracked like fragile porcelain. Puff! Fred flew backwards and fell to the ground, spitting out blood. Kid! I learned swordsmanship for war. Don't forget that I'm a fishman. This is my strongest weapon. The severe pain in his arm made Fred in no mood to listen to Jed's nonsense. He switched the sword to his left hand, swung his right hand forward, and shouted with a ferocious face. Devil's Claw! Click, click, click. The fleshy arm suddenly turned pitch black, with coal-like lines appearing on the surface of the skin. At the same time, the arm quickly enlarged in the air, turning into a giant black hand that could cover a house with one claw, and reached out to Jed fiercely. What? Can the superhuman system be used like this? If Fred didn't really have an elemental physique, Jed would have doubted his life. The demon's claw came fast and hard. Jed estimated his own speed and realized that he couldn't get away from the attack range before landing. Moreover, this claw was made from Fred's arm, so even if he dodged it once, he couldn't avoid the subsequent pursuit. In that case, smash it! Jed gritted his teeth, and the Murloc's natural tyranny radiated out. Facing the demon's claw, he clenched his right hand fiercely, turned his wrist, and changed the giant sword from upright to diagonal. Then he took a deep breath, drew the sword and swung it diagonally. The secret of the wind-walking style, swift wind crush. Hum! Countless gusts of wind instantly gathered on the sword blade, and the sharp humming sound was the giant sword vibrating at an extremely high frequency. As Jed moved, the sword blade wrapped in terrifying power collided with the demon claws, tearing the air and making it whistle continuously. Just at this moment, Fred roared and yelled, "Explode!" Not good. Jed never expected that this claw, which was obviously a phantom from Fred's arm, could actually be detonated, or that he would be willing to detonate it. Even if he was the user of the coal fruit, after the self-detonation, the arm would be severely injured and its meridians would be damaged, or even reduced to ashes. But it was too late now. The moment the sword blade collided with the giant claw, fire took over everything. The next moment, everything was silent. Boom, boom. In the distance, inside the palace, Rosa sat in her bedroom, holding a pair of scissors and a branch, cutting off the extra branches and inserting them into a vase. Outside the window, a battle was going on to purge the rebels, with wailing and roaring, fighting and cursing, and Cap's wild laughter could be clearly heard even across 3 courtyards. Further away, Jed and Fred were fighting endlessly, and the people of the capital were in a panic, struggling in the chaos caused by thugs and ruffians. Rosa seemed unaware of all this and remained calm as she stared at the 2 remaining roses on the table, struggling over how to choose. At this moment, a shocking explosion sounded, and the strong vibration was felt even by her. Okay. This finally interrupted Rosa's actions. She tilted her head slightly and frowned, still showing her youthful beauty. Even in her old age, she still had the grace and elegance of a queen. It seems to be too powerful. Well, never mind. If I don't give him some pain, no one will think that I am the queen of 1,000 faces and I am easy to bully. In fact, Gino probably couldn't imagine that Rosa's real purpose was not to get them to the palace, but to get them to gather together. Rosa was well aware of how cunning those nobles were. She wanted to prevent them from thinking that she saw through everything and that her decision was correct, but she couldn't catch them all in one fell swoop. Chapter 54, Chaos in Huachu, Part. I need to pee, let me out. Bang dang. An iron basin was thrown into the cage, and the small soldier said unhappily, "Use this to solve it. You are abusing children. It is unjust." Miss Huang Jianzhou, whose face turned red with shame, was furious and stretched out her little hand to grab someone. "I was just following orders." However, the soldier had anticipated this and took a step back to avoid the sneak attack. After saying this, he walked away expressionlessly. Watching him walk away, Huang Jianzhou, who had been baring his fangs and claws, suddenly sat back in the cage dejectedly. Finished. This time it's really over. These Navy men are well trained and powerful. They don't care about anything except orders. They are obviously not an ordinary force and will not give her any chance to escape. And even if she could leave the cage, could she really escape? Not knowing what he was thinking of, Huang Jianzhou's body trembled, a trace of fear flashed in his eyes, and he looked up at the tall figure in front of the team. He had neatly combed black hair draped over his forehead, and his appearance could only be described as ordinary. But his eyes were full of confidence, indifference, and a bit of cunning, as if nothing in the world could surprise him. He was 2.33 meters tall, wearing the unique green leaf uniform of the Hwaja Guards. He was not strong, and was far from the fat and strong elite soldiers around him. He looked easy to deal with. But it was such a not-so-strong guy who created such a terrible thunderstorm. The deafening thunder. The terrible wails of the subordinates. The strange and foul smell in the air. It will become a nightmare that she will never get rid of for the rest of her life. Even such a powerful Mr. 3 was easily killed by this person with just one move. Their strengths were simply not on the same level. How will I be treated? Golden Week has started to make me think wildly. Imprisoned? Or executed? Maybe they will sell me to a noble as a slave? I heard that many nobles have perverted interests. It was not surprising that Golden Week would think this way. After all, the idea that Crocodile had instilled in them so far was to annex Alabasta and build an ideal kingdom where everyone could live happily. So Golden Week was familiar with hating the nobles. After all, the nobles in the One Piece world are not good people. Rumble. At this moment, a cracking sound came from afar, echoing in the quiet night. It was not a crisp explosion, but more like the sound of a firecracker thrown into the bottom of an upside-down bowl. The team returning to the palace immediately stopped and waited on the spot. Tryon and Ron walked to the top of the hillside and looked up with the advantage of their strong physique and vision. That place seems to be the residence of the nobles, right? Ron raised an eyebrow, the corner of his mouth twitching. Hey, is that old bastard going to tear down the embassy? Different countries have different rules. The rule in Hwaju is that except for servants, palace guards, and royal bloodlines, no one else is allowed to spend the night in the palace. The nobles from the member states came to attend the Queen's birthday banquet. Their residence was outside the royal palace, just like the navy, in a manner specially built for envoys from various countries. From this angle, isn't that the place that was blown to pieces by the explosion? Could it be that they were attacked by the remnants of the Baroque works? Tryon frowned. If so many nobles were killed, our navy will be blamed. It's not that I can't escape the blame, but I'm destined to take the blame. And if it wasn't done by the old bastard, then the only possibility was the Queen. Queen Rosa, isn't she going to be abandoned too? Ron added rationally in his mind, frowning silently. The more Tryon thought about it, the more he felt something was wrong. He called out and ordered, "Everyone, stay where you are. Keep an eye on the prisoners. Except for me, Ron, and Vice Admiral Garp, anyone who dares to approach the prisoners will be killed without mercy." Yes. After arranging the soldiers, Tryon said to Ron, "You are fast, go back and take a look first. If there is any problem, tell me." Understood. Ron really couldn't use the speed of lightning in actual combat, after all, it was too fast. But in this open area, the advantages of the Thunder Fruit can be fully utilized, far exceeding the shaving and moon steps. Without further ado, Ron nodded, and in a flash, he turned into a flash of lightning and disappeared on the spot. At the back of the team, Golden Week in the cage saw Ron leave and his eyes lit up, thinking he had a chance to escape. But after seeing Tryon standing in the center of the team with a sword, the only hope in his heart was gone. It was true that Ron brought a lot of pressure to her, but the guy in front of her was no small one either. The sky was filled with flames and smoke. The palace and the embassy were two important facilities that caught fire and exploded, bringing chaos to the entire city. Along the way, all I could see were chaotic people, who were terrified and wanted to flee the city overnight with their families. However, the guards at the city gate had long been controlled by Fred, and no one dared to open the gate without knowing what had happened. Rosa told Ron that the guards had been replaced, so he didn't bother to talk nonsense with her and just turned into lightning and flew over her head. Near the palace and inside the embassy, The armor on Jed's body was tattered, and large pools of blood merged into the soil and gravel, dyeing the ground red. As a fishman, he had an innate advantage in physical ability. When he grew up, his wrist strength was 10 times that of a human. But such a powerful fishman did not rule the world, which shows that other species in the sea are not weak either. As his disciple, Fred is the strongest among the strong. However, a disciple is still a disciple after all, and Jed never said that Fred could become a disciple. Boom! That's it. Fred. Jed stuck his two-handed sword into the soil to support his overloaded body. Not far in front of him, Fred was disheveled and in a mess. The sword in his hand broke into 2 pieces, one half was stuck in the main body of the building that had not collapsed yet, and the other part was held in his hand. Hearing Jed's words, Fred looked at the nobles around him who were blown to pieces, his face full of bitterness. So that's what you are trying to do. He didn't cause the explosion. But, Queen Rosa. His demon claws would not produce such terrible destructive power. Not only the front and backyards of the ambassador's manor, but also the streets outside and the woods outside the wall were covered. It was obvious that someone had buried explosives in the ambassador's manor in advance, waiting for him to use a big explosion. He already had a guess in his mind. At this moment, no matter how he explained, the nobles of the Allied powers would not believe that he did not do it on purpose. No matter the traces of the explosion, the residue in the air, or anything else, anyone who came to check would know that it was the masterpiece of his soot explosion. Fred never thought that his seemingly kind-hearted aunt was so brave. These are the nobles of the member countries of the world government. Among them are members of the royal families of various countries. An explosion went down. Gone. Gino and Andre died the fastest because they were closest to the battlefield. The few remaining people stared at him with ferocious faces full of hatred and fear. His allies died or went crazy in the explosion, so there was no way they could support him to take the throne. Kill him. Kill the executioner. Fred. We wholeheartedly supported you to get to the top, but you actually wanted to blow us all up just to avoid paying us. General Jade. I order you in the name of the Duran royal family to kill him. Jed ignored the shouting of these people. His goal had been achieved, and the remaining nobles were nothing to worry about. Even if he could see the trick, Jed was not afraid. Then, a pair of cold eyes swept over, and the nobles lowered their heads. Seeing this, Jed snorted coldly and said, "How to deal with Fred is the right of Her Majesty the Queen. You want to kill him, which is beyond your authority and disrespectful to the Queen." Boom! Pulling out the door sword and stomping it down again, a crack spread upwards, crushing the badly damaged embassy. Then, in the billowing smoke, Jed's voice was as cold as a knife, slashing across the necks of a group of nobles, those who disrespect the Queen. Kill. Seeing that the nobles understood the facts and stopped talking, Jed turned around and said to Ron, who appeared there at some point, "Captain Ron, I leave the matter here to you. I'm going to take Fred to see the Queen." "Hey, don't entrust such a complicated matter to a layman like me, General Jed." Ron sighed helplessly, then a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, and he looked at the group of frightened quails. "Oh no, nobles! Everyone, please come this way." Chapter 55. Everyone is happy. Ron almost forgot about it because Rosa revealed the truth about the plan. Queen Rosa is not only known for her love for her people and her deep scheming, but also for her decisiveness and dominance. At first, when he learned that a coal smoke explosion had occurred in the embassy, causing heavy casualties among the nobles, Ron's reaction was, "Is Fred crazy?" But when he learned that Fred himself was seriously injured and dying in the explosion of his own fruit ability, Ron's reaction was the same as Fred's: "What a cruel method." Of course he could see that this was a premeditated murder. Moreover, he could guarantee that the murder was purely spur of the moment, and it took no more than 3 hours from planning to execution. I thought the Queen would come up with some effective strategy to ensure the continuation of the plan in the face of Garp's intrusion, but I didn't expect her to simply overturn all the plans and directly blow up the nobles of the allied countries who colluded with Fred with a shocking explosion. It can be said to be quite vicious. Some people may ask, how can Fred inherit the throne in this case? Ron only figured out this problem after Tryon received the signal and returned. After all, Fred succeeded to the throne, so why not? This is the Flower City, Queen Rosa's base camp. Except for the nobles of various countries, only the Queen and her group knew what happened tonight. They were the ones who decided right from wrong. Whether it was blocking the news or falsely accusing the nobles of various countries of assassinating the Queen, it was all done naturally under the explosion. According to the Queen's sinister nature, Ron dared to guarantee that Fred would be forced to take over the hot throne with tears in his eyes for his great merit in protecting the Queen and confronting nobles from various countries. Of course, the victims would not give up, and a war was inevitable, but Rosa had anticipated this. Jed's return and the prosperity of the Flower City gave them the confidence to face any war. Don't forget that the Flower City is not smaller than Alabasta, and there is no desert area. Its national strength can be called the strongest member country in the first half of the Grand Line. The war would not cause them any serious harm. On the contrary, a great war would unite the whole country and make them obey Fred's rule. Speaking of this, does it look familiar? That's right. This was the plan before. The destination remained the same, Rosa simply changed the route that she had originally planned to take. It can even be said that with Fred's merit, the Navy no longer has to take the blame, and they should be grateful to Rosa instead. Realizing this, Ron couldn't help but shudder. Dirty. It's really dirty. These leaders of the ally countries who seemed inconspicuous in the original novels are all tough guys. Unlike Garp's great wisdom that comes with age, Queen Rosa's methods are the accumulation of talent, practice, time, and status. None of them can be missing. She completely beats Garp, and it is a pure IQ crush. It's a good thing you didn't marry her. Looking at Garp passing by him, Ron sighed sincerely. Garp was confused and scratched the back of his head. Although he didn't understand, he was sure that it was not a good thing to say, so he clenched his fists and said, "What do you mean, kid?" "Nothing." Ron turned around and walked away decisively, but after a few steps, he suddenly remembered something and turned back to Garp and said, "By the way, Vice Admiral Garp, tell the Marshal to give me less trouble from the Allied countries in the future. I'm afraid." "You?" Garp raised his eyebrows and wanted to hit him, but he didn't do anything until Ron walked away. He was still thinking that he was sorry for Ron. After a long time, he sighed and said to himself, "Okay. There is never too many people when clearing out pirates." The next day, the Queen's birthday banquet was held as scheduled. No one knows what Fred and the Queen talked about last night. The people only know that 3 major events happened today. First, the Queen's 70th birthday. Second, Fred inherits the throne. Third, a total of 7 countries declared war on Hwaju. Just as Ron expected, after the explosion last night, a story about a foreign noble murdering the Queen and trying to deprive the royal power appeared in the streets. Common people love to spread gossip about big shots, not to mention that this gossip involves their own interests. As a result, faced with the unanimous boycott from the entire Flower City, the nobles whose loved ones had died fled in panic, not even daring to attend the birthday banquet. Then a total of 7 countries gnashed their teeth at Flower City and declared war on it through Den Den Mushi. Not to mention Rosa, even Fred expressed disdain for these people. The best way to declare war is to launch a surprise attack, seize a large amount of treasure, detain a large number of people, and then make a shameless request to force the opponent to make a decision, thus killing the opponent. The behavior of this group of guys calling in advance to give notice seems to be unwilling to lose face for the nobles and the country, but in fact they have some unrealistic idea and want to get compensation through private transactions. Compensate? Do you want a fist as big as a sandbag? If you want to fight, fight. Fred was eager to fight an anti-invasion war, with the whole country united to defend their country. Only in this way would his throne be more stable. At this point, all the troubles in Hwaju have been resolved, and everyone is happy. Queen Rosa left a very deep impression on Ron. She is a true royal. Kindness and cruelty coexist, gentleness and tyranny are parallel. She is willing to plan everything for her loved one Fred, and she is willing to go to war to help Fred sit on the throne. She can also treat the enemy as livestock and kill them wantonly for the people of Hwaju. If it weren't for Rosa, Ron's impression of the nobles in the One Piece world might still remain on the standard template of celestial dragons, and he might suffer a great loss in the future. 3 days later, the navy set out. The results of this mission have been reported to Marshal Sengoku. After knowing that Rosa used the navy, Sengoku told Garp to go back immediately with a twitching face. Because he couldn't curse Rosa. The annihilation of the Baroque workspace in Hwaju was a real achievement, and this achievement was worthy of being presented to the 5 elders. In addition, the new king, Fred, took the initiative to shoulder the blame for blowing up the nobles of the allied countries without the navy having to bear the responsibility. The navy owed Rosa a favor. It's a sunny day today. The Doghead warship is docked at the shore and all the soldiers have boarded. After abdicating from the throne, Rosa lost a bit of her former nobility, and always had a kind smile on her face. She first waved her hand and took off the white rose on Ron's chest, and then said, "In fact, I didn't expect such a change to happen, but don't worry, I promised you a lot of benefits." Then, "Thank you, Your Majesty." Ron's eyes lit up and he bowed in thanks. "So in the final analysis, I'm the only one who was kept in the dark about this whole thing, right?" Garp blew his beard and glared at the side. "Do you know how serious this is? Can you take the responsibility if something goes wrong? Come on. If it weren't for you, Lord Garp, acting on your own, we wouldn't have to go through so much trouble. How dare you complain?" Before Ron could retort, Rosa rolled her eyes. The more she looked at Ron, the more she liked him. She felt like she was taking care of him as a junior. However, Ron was a little scared of this kindness. Even though Rosa is as amiable as an old grandmother now, most of the bodies of the nobles who died that night are not gathered together yet. Cap knew he was in the wrong, so he didn't answer. He glared at Ron, then turned and yelled at the soldiers, "Why are you all crowding on the deck? Get back to your posts and get ready to go." "Yes." The soldiers immediately scattered like birds and beasts and returned to their respective posts. Ron shrugged apologetically to Rosa and was about to board the ship when Fred suddenly stepped forward and stopped him. "You said that you would answer my questions when I inherit the throne." "Okay." Rosa raised her eyebrows curiously. You're talking about that thing." Ron suddenly realized what was going on. He reached out and pulled up his green leaf uniform, revealing the simple outfit of a naval clerk underneath. He then grinned and said, "Procedurally speaking, I'm just a civilian." Procedurally speaking, it means that Ron has never officially joined the Navy. Everything they had previously thought and taken for granted was just one-sided conjecture. Fred. Oh no, King Fred stared at all this in a daze. After 3 seconds he understood and could only shake his head and smile bitterly. "You'd be a good general, Ron. Thank you for your kind words." Ron touched his nose and then saluted solemnly. "Well then, everyone, I'll take my leave. Wish you a safe journey. Let's set sail." With the loud call, the war beast, the dog-headed warship, slowly left the port and quickly disappeared into the horizon with the help of the monsoon brought by the warm current. Looking at the flower capital West Island gradually turning into a line in the distance, Ron had a premonition that they would meet again. After all. Achoo! On the deck, Garp rubbed his nose and suddenly sat up suspiciously. "There are always villains who want to harm me." Chapter 56 Are You the Devil? 1 month later, at the Navy headquarters. No matter how much time has passed, Marineford has not changed at all. It is like the magic needle left by Dehu to control the floods. It has stood for hundreds of years, majestic and solemn, suppressing the surging tide of the times. Today, at the top of the headquarters fortress, Sengoku sat in his office, reading the documents in his hands. After a long time, he put the information down and said to He, "The interrogation work is handed over to you, you must dig out as much information as possible. If possible, also find out the true identity of their behind-the-scenes boss." Understand? Lieutenant General He took the task seriously and nodded to indicate that he understood. Her wash fruit can not only be used as an offensive means, but also can act on the mysterious spiritual level, washing away a person's evil and leaving the purest goodness. However, after all, it is the power of controlling the mind, so this ability cannot be used on soldiers, and it cannot even be advertised to avoid causing panic. But if the target is a criminal, then there is no need to restrain yourself. Baroque works threatens not only the Grand Line, but also the Four Seas. It can be said that except for the New World, there are traces of their existence everywhere. If we can catch them all in one fell swoop, the benefits are self-evident. Darth Bonus had been awake for half a month, and Tryon was in charge of the interrogation. However, since Crocodile had entrusted him with such an important task, it was no doubt that he was very tight-lipped. So Garp waved his hand and said, "Since he won't say anything, then forget it. They are not professional interrogators, why should they worry about it? Well, there's also the little girl who calls herself Miss Golden Week." Jean Guo rubbed his temple with a headache. "Can I give it to you too, Crane?" It has now been confirmed that the little girl from Golden Week is not a devil fruit user, but rather possesses a strange talent. She can use the colors she mixes to give psychological hints to people and animals, thereby controlling a person's emotions. If this ability did not exist, Jean Guo would have put her in prison without saying anything, and after confirming that she was fine, he would have sent her to the headquarters military academy for years of justice education to correct her 3 views. But with the existence of this ability, the issue of education during the Golden Week becomes urgent. Only Crane, who has the ability of the washing fruit, can change her paranoid values from growing up among assassins. However, in this way, Jean Guo always feels guilty about being an unscrupulous boss who exploits the labor of his employees. As a marshal, he even said, "Can you?" In response, he raised his head and looked at Jean Guo with deep eyes. "Well, leave the child to me for the time being." So Jean Guo breathed a sigh of relief. Some people may ask, why is the treatment of Golden Week so different? No. All the same. If it is later found out that Golden Week is a murderous witch or has done something unscrupulous, then the procedure will be like this: Sengoku will of course put her in prison without saying a word, and after confirming that there is a problem, she will either be imprisoned and impelled down or executed in secret. There is no such thing as human rights in this world. The old and the young are treated equally. If you do evil, you must bear the corresponding price. As the leader of the Navy headquarters that suppresses the sea, Sengoku's ruthlessness is particularly evident towards his enemies. After finishing the business, Jean Guo picked up another piece of information with a strange look in his eyes. "It's been less than a month since you officially joined the army and you're going to Hell Island for training. Ron, this is considered a record, right?" "Okay." Crane took the information doubtfully, glanced at it, and suddenly smiled kindly. "So that's it, Zifa has nothing to do." It was a form for Ron to apply for special training on Hell Island, signed and submitted by Zifa, saying that Ron had reached a bottleneck in his growth and that the training in the recruit camp was not suitable for him and that he needed greater pressure to make progress. It seemed clear and logical, but in fact, both of them could see that Zifa was really out of options. Ron is growing so fast. So fast. His perseverance and talent were obvious to all in the recruit camp, and even frightened people. For example, How tough are the targeted training courses in the boot camp? Anyone who goes there will feel exhausted and breathless, and will inevitably want to take a rest. But Ron doesn't need anyone to remind him of his daily training. He not only maintains the quality and quantity, but also squeezes his potential to practice. Zifa asked him to punch 1,000 times, he punched 2,000 times. Zifa asked him to attack with all his strength for 300 times, he did 600 times. He was exhausted every time, his capillaries burst and bled, and his face looked like a devil, but he always got up, and even did better and better. I used to say that others were training desperately, sorry, Ron was really risking his life. If he didn't have the help of his super-speed recovery ability, he would have died of exhaustion under this kind of stressful training. Just ordinary exercise pushed him to the brink of death. What kind of terrible willpower is this? In this way, the only things Zifa could teach Ron were the 6 marine styles and various combat techniques, which required time to accumulate and explore. As for the domineering aura that required years of understanding and awakening, Zifa would not dare to teach it privately without military merit. Then came the interesting part. Ron's talent in physical skills was recognized by the high-ranking officers of the Navy. Garp taught him paper drawing, and he mastered it within half a month. After a month, he could apply what he had learned to other situations, and there was nothing more to learn. In the past, Zifa was worried that his disciples were not good enough, and he had a lot of things he couldn't teach. Now Zifa is worried that Ron is too evil, and apart from the domineering and the remaining 3 moves and 6 styles that are forbidden to teach, what else can he teach? The answer is none. So he thought of a way to send Ron to Hell Island. Only after staying on Hell Island for 3 months could Ron pass the camp with excellent results and learn the 4th move of the 6 forms. Then he would leave the recruit camp and go to sea as a formal officer. At that time, Ron would have plenty of time and opportunities to gain military merit, and then he could teach Ron all his skills. Well, since my old friend has come to me for help, I'll make an exception. Zhang Guo could imagine how much change had taken place after Ron's return, otherwise Zifa would not have submitted his application immediately. Although the new recruits of the headquarters could not go to Hell Island if they had not trained for a year, why were there no exceptions? Ron himself is not a guy who follows the rules. In the recruit barracks building an underground training room, Ron's guess came true. 2 months ago, on the first day he left the headquarters, he joked to Zifa that Xiuzhou needed to go out for training. As a result, Xiuzhou was really reinstated and went to sea. Then, Ron's actual combat training target changed from the still bullyable Xiuzhou to the retired General Zephyr. This is sour. Bang! With a dull crack, the training room began to flash red. That was because the outer wall suffered extensive damage, and the early warning system of the training room began to alarm. However, Zifa was not worried, because he was sure that it was not an enemy invasion that destroyed the wall. After all, the person clinging to the wall was Ron. Hey? You didn't dodge. Zifa maintained his sweeping stance, looking at Ron who was fitting perfectly in the spider web-like pit, feeling a little strange. You fell down before I even put in any effort? Are you kidding me? Cough, cough. Hearing this, the corners of Ron's mouth twitched as he was in a daze. God, he didn't dodge. Do you know how fast your foot is? I bet even that old bastard Garp can't dodge perfectly. He even used armament haki, as if he was afraid that he couldn't kill me with his kicks. After taking a few breaths, Ron moved his limbs, trying to pull himself out of the gap. The movement involved broken bones, and he winced in pain. After a long time, he suddenly felt that he had lost his support and fell off the wall. Bang! Continuing to take a deep breath, Ron said to Zifa like a salted fish, "Let's stop today's training, teacher. Let me heal my injuries." Not anymore. Even if his self-healing ability is amazing, if he continues to fight, he will really be killed by Zifa. Zephyr smacked his lips at Ron's request. To be honest, although Ron's strength is not yet obvious, he is definitely first-rate in terms of toughness and resistance to beatings. Over the past few days, he even began to like the feeling of beating Ron. Just imagine, a sandbag that can recover within a day after being beaten, and can also be strengthened after being beaten. There is no reason for Zifa not to like it. However, Ron was too far behind him and had more and more wounds on his body. It would be more troublesome to continue fighting. It was time to stop. Well, that's all for today, and we'll continue tomorrow. Zifa said something that made Ron relax, and then added earnestly, "Get stronger quickly, my disciple. This way, I can fight more happily." Chapter 57 New Instruments. Speaking of which, Ron, what benefits did Rosa promise you? The time is a few days later, the location is the hospital of the headquarters' new recruits camp, and the speaker is Garp. After throwing the criminals into prison, Garp never took care of the rest. In fact, he was too lazy to care. After all, the old bastard had been sitting in office and doing nothing for a long time. Marshal Sengoku would take care of everything. But to everyone's disappointment, Darth Bonus really had no idea about the treasure that Baroque Works wanted to find and the person behind Baroque Works. Vice Admiral Tsuru used his fruit ability on him several times before he finally confirmed that the other party was not lying. Even the senior executives of Baroque Works didn't dare to say they knew each other, let alone the boss behind the scenes, Crocodile. Ron had expected this situation, so it wasn't surprising to hear Garp talk about it. But about Rosa's promise, "I'll keep it a secret for now. Anyway, it won't be anything that will harm the Navy." Something. Garp rubbed his chin and suddenly raised his eyebrows. "Don't let me know that you are using this opportunity to threaten Rosa in exchange for treasure, otherwise I will not let you go." Ron's mouth twitched and he rolled his eyes and ignored him. Hospitals are meaningless to people like Ron. He can completely rely on his special physique to heal his injuries by himself, and the diagnosis will be the same whether he has a doctor or not. However, the hospital provides various painkillers and carefully prepared nutrient solutions to make him feel better and speed up his recovery. Therefore, every time he finishes a battle with Zifa, Ron will come to the hospital to lie down for a long time. Ron could also see that Zephyr really had nothing to teach him at this stage, and he could only use repeated beatings, yes, that's right, to make him fully integrate the rote learning he had received into actual combat. Speaking of which, Vice Admiral Garp, why isn't Major General Tryon with you? As a staunch Garp faction, Tryon is always with Garp. Garp only came to inform him about the follow-up of the interrogation. There is no need for Tryon to avoid suspicion, right? Oh, you mean that little devil? In front of Garp, except for a few of his fellow soldiers, the rest were just a bunch of little devils. Garp winked at Ron and said, "Do you want to go over and take a look?" "What are you looking at?" "The second batch of lightning stimulation equipment has arrived, and he went to test it." Ron looked confused. After the lightning stimulation instrument showed initial results, the 5 elders waved their hands and officially listed it as a scientific research project on par with the pacifists. Ron was slightly surprised at this, but it was not surprising after a moment. The pacifists' combat power is extremely terrifying. One machine can destroy a city and a country. In the future, several PX-3 machines will even be able to beat up all the supernovas of Luffy's generation. But the cost is too high, and no one can afford the huge amount of money required for large-scale installation. Even though Vegapunk developed it to the PX-5 model 7 years later, only the Navy headquarters and Marijoa had small-scale equipment. The Navy deployed it to the battlefield during the war, and it was not surprising that all the stocks were used. Moreover, the ocean is vast, and it is unrealistic to rely solely on rigid pacifists to maintain stability. In contrast, the lightning stimulation instrument is a supplement. The pacifist is expensive to produce, while it is cheap. The pacifist takes effect quickly, while it takes effect slowly. The pacifist cannot be mass-produced, while it can be popularized to all the little superhero groups in the Navy. Both have their own advantages and disadvantages, but they complement each other perfectly. And because it does not involve the ability of devil fruits, but only pure electric current stimulation, after Vegapunk has thoroughly studied the principles of lightning stimulation, the remaining improvements and upgrades are just a slow process and will not waste too much of his time. Therefore, it is not surprising that it is listed as an equal project. Of course, the benefit of this incident is that Ron, as a developer, left a good impression on the 5 elders. This is the kind of talent the world government needs. He has brains and awareness, obeys orders, and is not greedy for credit. He doesn't hide any good things and actively contributes them to Vegapunk for research. This alone can ensure that Ron's future official career will be smooth. The location was still the Naval Science Unit. When Ron and Garp came in, Kizaru, who was stationed there, came over to greet them with his ugly expression. "Hey! Vice Admiral Garp, Ron, did you guys come here because you heard the news?" Also. Ron looked around and asked, "Apart from us, is there anyone else, General Kizaru?" "Yeah, there are a lot of people." Kizaru raised his hand, squinted his eyes and thought for a while. "There are Vice Admiral Flying Squirrel, Vice Admiral Burning Mountain, Vice Admiral Menard, Vice Admiral Momosegi." "Oh, yes. And you, Vice Admiral Garp?" "Except for the guys who are on the mission, all the Vice Admirals of the headquarters are here. All the lieutenants from the headquarters are present." "What the hell? Okay." Seeing Ron looking frightened, Kizaru came over and asked curiously, "You don't know anything, do you, Ron?" "Me? Is there something I should know?" Ron turned to look at Cap for an answer. "Of course it's because of Tryon." Garp seemed to have expected this, and patted Ron on the shoulder. "Although the first phase instrument is good, it is of no use to most of the generals in this department. However, the second phase is different. Its upper limit is 6,000 Dao force, which is only one step away from radiating to the lieutenant generals in this department. Do you think they care?" Ron suddenly understood. To explain this problem, we need to first mention the Dao value judgment standard that is popular in the Navy. Unlike the pirate camp, the Dao value judgment standard is quite popular among the Navy and the world government. Although it cannot clearly represent the upper limit of combat power, it can accurately judge a person's lower limit. Therefore, in the Navy headquarters, some positions require not only military merit but also a certain level of Dao power. The Dao power required for a general officer starts at 3,000. A physique 300 times stronger than that of an ordinary person. This number is considered exaggerated by the 4 Cs branch and the Grand Line branch, but it is actually just the minimum requirement for a brigadier general at the headquarters. That is why the officers of this headquarters have a high status in the entire naval system, because they are the real elites. Then, the starting salary for Major General is 4,000, the starting salary for Lieutenant General is 5,000, and the starting salary for General is... well, no. Admiral represents the highest combat power of the Navy headquarters, which cannot be summarized by a simple evaluation. Otherwise, the evaluation is meaningless. If you can defeat all the vice admirals of the headquarters and fight against the current admiral without losing, then you have the ability to be an admiral. Of course, the above standards are just for reference, because in real life, some people have enough military merits and a Dao power value of more than 6,000, but they are only a major general. After all, it is the headquarters of the Navy, the cradle of the strong. For the monsters working in this department, this minimum standard is a problem that they have no chance to worry about if they have achieved military merit. They set the upper limit very high, and no one cares about the lower limit. On the contrary, if the Dao power value is not outstanding enough, they will not have the face to be promoted even if they have achieved military merit. It is better to be the head of a chicken than the tail of a phoenix. It is just such a simple truth. Shuzo with 4,000 Dao power is only a brigadier general, Ron with 2,700 Dao power is comparable to the colonel of the headquarters, and 6,000 Dao power is only one step away from radiating to the vice admirals. This shows how terrifying the headquarters of the Navy is. Therefore, the first phase of the instrument only covers up to 3,000 force values, which is meaningless to most brigadier general level officers and even chicken head colonels. However, the instrument can be upgraded, and as long as research continues, its upper limit will only get higher and higher. Anyway, Ron can guarantee that he himself has not seen the end of the lightning stimulation method. Therefore, when the lieutenant generals heard that the coverage of the second phase of the equipment had reached 6,000 force values, they couldn't sit still. Today is 6,000 Dao power, what about the future? Most of them have reached the peak of humanity, and there is no hope of breaking through in this lifetime. If the instrument can work, wouldn't it be an extra chance? When it comes to the desire to become stronger, no one in the One Piece world is an exception. Chapter 58 M. Caesar Courant. Following Kizaru, the three of them came to the underground warehouse together. Unlike the last time when there were only a few of them here, it was very lively here today. Lieutenant generals from the headquarters of the famous town of Dahai gathered around the temporary stands built on the edge, with major generals and brigadier generals among them, whispering to each other, waiting for the test to begin. Looking at them, Ron couldn't help but think that if Whitebeard suddenly appeared and punched the air, the Navy's core strength would be reduced by at least 1/3. There was a group of researchers in white coats in the open space in the middle surrounded by the stands. The shirtless man sitting in a giant instrument that covered an area of more than 10 square meters was Tryon, who had a Dao power of more than 6,000 and was only a major general. Ahem, I'm not going to avoid relatives when giving examples. When Cap walked in, Tryon noticed it immediately and straightened his back and saluted. Lieutenant General Garp. Tryon didn't move. The second phase instrument required more complex equipment to maintain stability because of the increased current, so he couldn't move once he sat on it until the researchers had everything set up. Well, I'll just come over to watch the fun, you can focus on the test. Garp waved his hand as a greeting. Understand. Then he looked at Ron and nodded sincerely. Ron nodded in confusion in return. Mr. Garp, this is... At this time, a tall man wearing a righteous cloak came over. He looked very special, not because of his special facial features, but because his upper face looked exactly like a Dalmatian, with 2 dog ears hanging down longer than his chin. The lower face had a normal human structure, with a circle of golden beard that was very conspicuous. At the same time, the back of his hands also had Dalmatian-like fur, and his feet were supported on the ground like a dog, looking like a lively dog-headed man. Judging from his military rank, he is a lieutenant general of the headquarters, just like Garp, but his tone is full of respect, which is probably a common problem among the Garp faction in the headquarters. Oh, it's Dalmesia. Garp was surprised and said, it seems that you have gotten used to the half-beast transformation, which is not bad. The Dalmatian form of the dog-in-dog fruit doesn't have any special abilities. I can only work on strengthening my body. By the way, this person... Vice Admiral Dalmesia smiled bitterly and shook his head, continuing to look at Ron. At this, Garp suddenly realized and slapped his head, I almost forgot. Ron, this is Vice Admiral Dalmesia, a master of physical skills who can maintain the half-beast form for a week. A week in a row. Hello, Lieutenant General Dalmesia. Ron stood at attention and saluted. This is true respect. Among the 3 types of devil fruit users, the abilities of animal-type fruit users require the most physical support. However, because the animal type is too common and there are very few forms of incredible power, many animal-type users do not achieve much and are considered the weakest type, a typical case of a thankless job. Compared to the ancient species and mythical beast species, Vice Admiral Dalmesia's Dalmatian form looks ridiculous. But even under such a premise, This person practiced hard in physical skills, allowing himself to maintain the half-beast form for a long time, and tortured himself with the power of the fruit all the time. This is not only a proof, but also a training, and even more a belief. Ron saw himself in him. Ron, is that you? Dalmizia had obviously heard of Ron. Although he had not been present at the test a few months ago, he was no stranger to this super rookie who continued the legend of the three general monsters. Not to mention, their hope for a breakthrough, the lightning stimulation device, was developed based on the lightning stimulation method developed by Ron. If it weren't for Ron, most of them would have really reached the end. You're a good little guy. I'm optimistic about you. Ha 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 ha. Dalmizia's voice was not small, and many people heard the word Ron. As a result, the makeshift stands were noisy, and a large group of naval generals cast friendly glances at him. Feeling the gazes coming from all around, Ron suddenly understood why Capra asked him to come and watch the test. Just like when he asked me to follow him down the boat in Hwachu. Face it. He knew how many big shots had gathered here today, so he pulled himself over to show his face. And compared to Hwachu, the goodwill of his colleagues was undoubtedly more important. Ron nodded obediently to the group of big men while muttering in his heart, "Why is the old bastard so nice to me? Is he going to sell me out again? Beware of fraud." Ron had a smile on his face, but he was on guard in his heart. "Dr. Courant. The equipment has been debugged and is ready to start." Not long after, the white coats finished their performance. An old man with Mediterranean hair, who had met the couple once before, poked his head behind the instrument and said with some respect, "Got it. I'll be right there." A man with poor makeup appeared from behind the instrument. He had long purple-black hair, a horn-like decoration on his head, and thick purple paint on his lips. Perhaps that was his original lip color. If I were to describe her temperament in one word, it would be seductive. But at this moment, his face was covered in grease, he was holding a screwdriver in his hand, and he looked embarrassed. He waved his hand impatiently to drive the Mediterranean away. Then, he whispered to himself, "No, I have to check this again. There are so many generals watching me. If something goes wrong, I will never surpass Vegapunk in my life." When Ron noticed there was a guy lying behind the instrument, he didn't pay it any attention. "Repairman. What's the point of jumping up and down in the dark?" But the moment he looked up, Ron, who was complimenting Vice Admiral Flying Squirrel, almost bit his tongue. "What the hell? Caesar Courant?" The voluptuous bitch in front of him was none other than the big boss of the Punk Hazard chapter of the original novel, the mad scientist who had a bounty of 300 million offered by the world government, Caesar Kulang. "Why is this lunatic here?" Ron looked confused. "Well, what?" Admiral Flying Squirrel noticed something was wrong with Ron, followed his gaze, and frowned. "Do you know Dr. Caesar Courant? As a genius scientist second only to Vegapunk under the world government, shouldn't Ron know him? Officers below the rank of Rear Admiral in the naval headquarters are not even qualified to know the existence of the other party. Is it?" The Flying Squirrel narrowed his eyes. This old fellow who had been a lieutenant general of the headquarters 30 years ago had a very sharp vision. He suddenly had a bold guess in his mind. In response, Ron swallowed his saliva as if he didn't care at all, pointed at Caesar Courant and asked, "Lieutenant General Flying Squirrel, are the horns on his head real? Are they some kind of monster?" "Flying Squirrel." The Flying Squirrel twitched his lips speechlessly, relaxed, and rolled his eyes. "What a mess. It's just a decoration. Besides, the sea is so vast, even if someone really has horns on his head, what's so strange about it?" "Oh, that's how it is." Ron patted his chest and breathed a sigh of relief. "That's good. You know, I hate ghosts and monsters the most." "Hiss." The Flying Squirrel glared at Ron in disappointment, then shut up and stopped talking. Seeing this scene, Ron licked his lips dryly, took a half step back, but his eyes suddenly became deep. The Navy headquarters in the year 1515 of the Kayan calendar. Caesar Courant appears here. It seems that there is nothing wrong with this. Chapter 59 Instrument Failure. Caesar Courant was originally a member of the Navy's science force, a colleague of Vegapunk, and a genius scientist second only to Vegapunk. It was not surprising at all that he could appear in the Navy headquarters. But second only to Vegapunk means that Caesar Courant is not as good as Vegapunk. This recognized fact was a huge shame in Caesar's eyes. In order to prove that he is better than Vegapunk, he opposed Vegapunk everywhere. After repeated defeats, his thoughts became more and more extreme. Finally, in the future year of 1518, Caesar created the gas accident that destroyed the entire punk hazard. Because of this, he was ordered to be arrested by the world government and escorted back to Marijoa to be questioned. Later, he escaped from the prison ship with the help of Don Quixote da Flamingo, one of the 7 warlords of the sea. Flamingo took a fancy to the bloodline factor technology he and Vegapunk researched, and asked him to make sad, the raw material of Smile, an artificial animal-type devil fruit, for him, in order to trade with Kaido and take control of the reins of the monsters in the New World. Faced with Doflamingo's fist, the two sides began to cooperate, and Caesar Clown returned to Punk Hazard in 1519 of the Kayan calendar and began his own evil plan. The fans know what happened later. In addition to producing sad, Caesar also defrauded funds from the 4 emperors Charlotte Linlin. On the surface, he promised to help Charlotte Linlin conduct giant experiments, but in fact he used it to make poison gas bombs. 3 years later, in the year 1522 of the Kayan calendar, the Straw Hat Pirates set out again, passing by Punk Hazard, knocking it away, and then killing all the way to Dressrosa, knocking Doflamingo away, and then taking Caesar to Cake Island, and being beaten up by Charlotte Linlin. It is now the year 1515 in the Kayan calendar, and there are still 3 full years since the horrific poison gas accident, so he is still a highly regarded genius scientist. At most, he is a little naughty and has a bad relationship with his immediate superior, Vegapunk. Then it's really not surprising at all that Caesar appears at the Navy headquarters. The only weird thing is, why is he so concerned about the lightning stimulation device? Seeing Caesar Courant's greasy face, sweating profusely and unwilling to let others do the careful inspection, Ron thought for a moment and set the tone, who cares? I don't know him anyway. Another boring half an hour passed, and everyone was getting impatient. Tryon yawned, rubbed his eye mucus, turned his head and asked, Dr. Caesar, when will the test start? It will be done soon, it's done. Caesar answered perfunctorily, then suddenly exclaimed in surprise and locked a hatch behind the instrument. Dang dang dang! His body turned into a ball of light and empty smoke, and he walked from behind the instrument to the front, raised his hand and made a speech. Welcome everyone to my presentation. What you are going to see next is... Stop talking nonsense! Do you know how long we have been waiting? Bang! A half-eaten donut was thrown from the stands and hit Caesar at his feet. The latter wanted to get angry, but when he turned around, he laughed dryly and said, well, it seems that everyone can't wait, so without further ado, the experiment will begin immediately. Can't afford to offend. A large group of lieutenant generals from the headquarters narrowed their eyes and looked at him maliciously at the same time. Anyone who has tried it will know the pressure. The following is the first step. Please ask the experimenter to lie down first. Tryon followed the plan and lay down obediently. Then the second step is to gradually connect the power supply and close the hatch. Unlike the first phase, which used electrodes attached to the test subject, the second phase of the instrument powered the entire metal liner that contained the test subject. The white coats rushed up, turned on the power switches one by one, and after confirming something with Tryon, closed the hatch. Finally, it's the third step, it's time to witness a miracle. Puff! Ron spit out a mouthful of salt soda. He didn't want to complain about the strong feeling of locking an elephant in a refrigerator. He didn't expect that there would be Lu Huangzi's classic lines. Fortunately, everyone's attention was on the instrument at this time, and no one cared about what he did hiding in the corner. Caesar didn't care at all, and continued to shout in his unique sharp voice, "Main valve, open! Tsitsizi!" Suddenly, a sense of pressure spread outward, and several white coats accidentally fell to the ground, and then hurriedly ran away. It was terrible. A current of hundreds of millions of volts was compressed in the instrument. Even with a voltage divider as insurance, the surge generated was still substantial. The admirals present all felt the air become dry, their skin felt a slight sting, and their hair stood up uncontrollably. Well, few people would look so miserable. Several masters of physical skills among the vice-admirals in the headquarters were in control of the life return, and their hair was controlled and obedient before it had time to let go. Especially the beautiful Vice-Admiral Dautu, even though the metal chains on her shoulder straps were flying, her long, smooth black hair was still neat and tidy. Feeling Ron's gaze, Vice-Admiral Dautu turned around and nodded at him. "Haha, as long as you are happy." In the center of the venue, as the equipment gradually stabilized, the white coats took out their tools and began to measure data and take notes. Caesar was shaking with excitement. When he thought that the second phase equipment was developed by himself without Vegapunk's intervention, he could not contain his excitement. "How about it? How can your device that can only make ordinary soldiers stronger compare to my device that can make the generals of our headquarters stronger? Vegapunk, you finally lost to me." Although the inventor of the instrument was Vegapunk, this could only be considered a temporary victory. But Caesar Courant was confident that in the long run, he would be able to completely defeat Vegapunk and become the true first scientist. Then, boom, crackle. Suddenly, sparks flashed from the instrument, the humming sound of electricity disappeared abruptly, and the surroundings fell into darkness. What's going on? Is there a malfunction? What happened? Someone, light the candles. Caesar was terrified. If there was something wrong with the instrument, his dream would be aborted. Sizzle. At this moment, a human-shaped beam of light lit up. Ron was surrounded by an electric current of astonishing strength, making the surroundings as bright as day. He appeared near the wall, stretched out his finger to test the socket, and then said, "Don't worry, everyone. There's nothing wrong with the equipment. It's just that the generator of the scientific unit can't support such a huge current supply, so it tripped." As soon as these words came out, a clear sigh of relief echoed in the quiet test field. Kizaru waved his hand and shot out a ball of light, letting it float above the test field to illuminate, and then arranged, Groups 1 and 2, check the generator immediately. Group 3 check the circuit, and Group 4 notify the news to avoid causing confusion. Act quickly. Yes. The Supreme Commander of the Science Force spoke, and the situation suddenly became stable. After doing this, Kizaru looked at Ron, who was dispersing the electric current around him, and touched his chin. This kid didn't do it on purpose. He could have said nothing just now, because no one knew whether it was a problem with the instrument or a lack of power supply. But his fuss not only relieved the lieutenant generals who were anxiously waiting for a breakthrough, but also made Caesar Courant, the developer, grateful to him. With just one sentence, he increased the favorability of two groups of people. Kizaru admitted that he couldn't learn this move. What a cunning little devil! Kizaru shook his head, too lazy to pursue the matter. Thanks to the book friend, my favorite stir-fried pork with green peppers for the 500 reward. Thanks to the book friend, super big coffee for the 100 reward. I have been back home for a few days, so I can only update twice a day. My hairline problem is getting worse and worse, probably because of overwork in the past period of time. I will go back and get some wild walnuts and old hens to supplement it. Does God think that fat people must be bald? This is unscientific. Chapter 60 Hell Island Survival Training. After the Whitecoats took action, the cause of the failure was quickly found. It was indeed due to insufficient power supply from the scientific unit's generator. However, Caesar was also at fault. In order to gain credit, he did not carefully prepare the safety device for the power failure before sending the finished product to the Navy headquarters. At the moment of power failure just now, the chaotic current inside the instrument was forced to reach its peak. If it weren't for Tryon's strong strength, he would have been seriously injured if not killed. Therefore, the matter was handed over to the 5 Elder Stars. After all, they took away most of the equipment, and if something unexpected happened, the CP organization would be the hardest hit. Then, before waiting for the 5 elders to deal with it, Caesar Courant was ordered to stay at home. He could only go out when the design was complete. "Thank you very much for this time, Mr. Ron. If it weren't for you." At the entrance of the scientific unit, after being scolded by Kizaru in a murderous tone, Caesar ran over, wiping the cold sweat from his forehead. If Ron hadn't pointed out the cause of the accident as insufficient power supply, even if it was found out that it was not his main fault, the 5 elders would not punish him severely, and the group of lieutenant generals around him who were eagerly waiting to become stronger would tear him to pieces. What's the point of trying to be capable if you don't have the ability? I was shocked. Therefore, Caesar sincerely thanked Ron. After all, apart from his personality problems, Caesar deserved his status as the second best scientist in the world. "You're welcome, Dr. Caesar. After all, I was negligent in this matter. I am the developer of the lightning stimulation method, but I didn't consider the problem of how to supply high current to those who don't have the ability of the thunder fruit. I am ashamed to say it," Ron said with a smile, lightly revealing Caesar's mistake, and then said goodbye with a smile. Caesar watched Ron walk away, and suddenly he shuddered and became excited. "Yup! How could I be so stupid? The developer of the lightning stimulation method is right in front of you. With his help, this project is inherently invincible. And the other party is the user of the thunder fruit. The user of the thunder fruit who disappeared for hundreds of years. The pacifist who was pitted by Vegapunk is full of regrets because he does not have the ability of the thunder fruit user. If I were to first apply his abilities to weapons through the bloodline factor, wouldn't that mean?" Swish! Caesar's eyes lit up immediately, and he ran to catch up. Then Kizaru appeared beside him lightly, and stopped him just before he was about to step out of the door. "Dr. Caesar, where do you want to go?" Cold sweat immediately soaked his whole body. Caesar lowered his head and laughed dryly, "Nothing, nothing. I'm going to modify the instrument." After saying that, he turned into a wisp of smoke and disappeared around the corner of the corridor. "There'd better not be a second accident, Caesar, or I'll put you through the instrument for testing." Kizaru pouted and muttered to himself quietly. As a user of the natural gas fruit, Caesar's entire body was transformed into gas by the devil fruit. Even if you are not the commander of the scientific troop, ordinary people know that gas is very easy to ignite and explode. If Caesar is inserted into the instrument for testing, the high temperature of the electric current will continuously ignite him and burn him repeatedly. Assuming one is not dying, the pain is 100 times worse than being cut into pieces. The next day, at the headquarters' new recruit camp. After just a day of exercise, Ron was called to Zifa's office. "Dong dong dong. Come in." After getting a response, Ron pushed the door open and said, "Are you looking for me, Mr. Zifa?" "That's right, sit down and talk." Zifa took off his prosthetic limb and put it aside. As the weather gets warmer, the wooden prosthetic limb will only get hotter when worn on the hand, so Zifa usually does not wear the prosthetic limb in private. Ron's eyes paused for a moment on the prosthetic limb that was patinated by his hand, and then said, "Smoke less cigars when you are old. It is harmful to your health." Zifa paused while taking out the documents from the table, and after a moment's silence, he cursed, "I'm in good health. You don't need to worry about me." Then he took out the document and threw it to Ron. "Take a look, and sign it if you have no objection." Although he was not polite, Zifa silently put down the half-smoked cigar. Then he saw Ron rubbing the documents repeatedly like a psychopath, and suddenly he got angry. "What are you doing?" "No. Nothing." Ron shrank back and breathed a sigh of relief. "If it's not a yin-yang document, then what does it say?" A few minutes later, Ron finished reading the document, tapped his fingers on the table, and fell into deep thought. This document was not an important thing, just a qualification certificate for him to be transferred to Hell Island for survival training. Whether Hell Island is dangerous or not is another matter. Ron is concerned about something else. "If I survive 3 months on Hell Island, I'll be qualified to leave the camp, right? There is no graduation assessment in the recruit camp of Commander Zifa. That is something that only the little brats in the headquarters military academy have. If the recruits want to become a qualified officer, the iconic test is to go through the Hell Island survival training and live on the island for 3 months without any supplies. As long as he passes, Ron will no longer be a rookie, but a naval officer recognized by Zifa who can stand on his own. Are you so anxious to get me out?" Ron smacked his lips, not quite sure how to start. During the past 6 months, Zifa's care for him was obvious to all. Although he liked hands-on education, the benefits Ron got were real, and his strength was completely different from 6 months ago. These were not fake. When Ron thought that the teacher was going to drive him out of the recruit camp, he couldn't help feeling a little regretful. He didn't understand. In response, Zifa snorted coldly, "Do you believe that you will be beaten if you say another word?" Then, looking at the expression on Ron's face, Zephyr suddenly laughed, "There are still many things I want to teach you, Ron. Practical experience, knowledge of the sea, the 6 styles of the Navy, domineering, I want to teach you everything. But you have to know that we are the Navy. Here, if you want to learn advanced skills, you must have military merits to speak. So, do you understand what I mean?" Ron's eyes lit up instantly and he nodded. Understood. How could Ron not understand this? Because he had no military merits, Zifa was intimidated by the rules and could not teach him many things. In the recruit camp, no matter how outstanding he was just a recruit. How could he have so many military merits in exchange for teaching? The task of the chief instructor of Zifa's recruit camp was to ensure that the recruits did not fall behind too much. The rest was up to the soldiers themselves, which was also a disguised means of motivation. And even if they don't have talent, who doesn't like a soldier who is hardworking, diligent, and brave enough to fight? Thinking about it this way, leaving the recruit camp is not a bad thing. The Navy's most important military achievement. Never neglect those who have made contributions. Garp was nominated for the promotion to general several times in the past, not only because of his strength, but also because of his great military achievements, which were beyond reward. And his current extraordinary position in the headquarters, in addition to the reputation he had accumulated in the past, is also derived from this unrewarded military achievements. After all, you have to know that the old bastard is a guy who dared to curse the celestial dragons as garbage in front of the 5 elders and nothing happened to him. He is just a vice-admiral. Even if his strength reached the pinnacle, would the 5 elders be afraid of him? Now Ron has nothing, and Zifa is restricted by regulations and has nothing new to teach him. Only when he goes out to sea and slowly accumulates military merits, can Zifa teach him everything he knows without fear and train him to become a top-level Navy. No matter how advanced the skills are, they are nothing compared to military merit. The issue of not being able to receive Zifa's instruction once you leave the recruit camp is a joke in itself. Regardless of the fact that he was already a recognized disciple of Zifa, and the teacher was guiding his disciples in their practice, Marshal Zhangguo could not say that he was not right. For example, in the recruit camp, How often did Zifa appear in front of the public? He has plenty of time. Even if Ron leaves the recruit camp, he can still receive Zifa's teaching as long as he returns to the headquarters. That being the case. Wait, speaking of military achievements. Ron looked at Zifa cautiously and reminded him, it's been so long since the Flower City mission, and my military merits haven't been distributed yet. It has been almost half a month since they returned, plus the 1 month spent on the journey, so the distribution should have been completed by now. Oh, that thing. If you hadn't mentioned it, I would have forgotten it. Zifa looked at him with a smile. Originally, you have made great contributions, so you must be rewarded. But who told you to arrest the members of the Baroque Works Society as the captain of the guards of the Flower City Palace? So your contribution should be rewarded by Rosa. Oh no, King Fred. Ron was stunned. So I didn't get any credit, right? How could you do this? I was trapped in the enemy camp and had to endure humiliation. Even if I didn't get any credit, I must have worked hard, right? Humph. The 5 elders are upset by King Cobra of Alabasta. It's already a favor for them to continue to condone the naval operations. Do you still want to work harder? Zifa snorted coldly and waved his hand, sign or not. If you sign, get out. Boom. Standing outside the door blankly, Ron's face turned dark, and he gritted his teeth and spat out a name, Crocodile. Look at what you did. End of this chapter. Like and subscribe for more videos like this.